This story begins with a question. What if another person, just like you, worked in your place, trained in someone else's stead? Even living that life, technically, is the main character's life. He says, in a world where there are transcendent beings with devastating power, beings capable of reducing a world to mere remnants and ruin, he has this life. He almost has the life he wants, but he hasn't given up. In this place with monsters capable of destroying everything, there are also hunters. Because he hasn't given up, he works harder than anyone else to live a peaceful life. It almost sounds absurd, but he is doing his best to prepare for his future rest. However, that doesn't apply to everyone. This hunt is enormous, but it has to be taken down. The difference between him and others is that when that monster was ambushed and captured, he wasn't alone. There were several of them, each fighting bravely. Life boils down to skill, and the better one's individual skill, the stronger they are, and everyone on the team knows this well. That was his skill. Everyone, there was his own clone. He needs to work, study, and eat. There's so much he wants to do. He also wants to play, travel, and hang out with friends. But why can people only do one thing at a time? He always thought it would be great to have two bodies. So he managed to get two bodies in the capital. The day was calm and beautiful, and people were constantly walking around. There were also people discussing awakenings and their abilities. But there were also people thinking he's tired. He looked around, just wanted to go home quickly. His name is Jiang Xingyun, a second-year student at Jiangsheng National University, yearning for two bodies. A man holding a microphone caught everyone's attention. His name was Park Won-tae, an A-rank hunter. He told everyone he was the hunter in charge of the 10th Awakening Project. They were divided into groups and immediately began to move. Zhang Sangwoo was in that group. He thought his turn would come soon. When it was his turn, an assistant asked him if he was number 7 in group 37 and confirmed his name. She scanned a bracelet on his arm for identification to verify his identity. She told him the authentication was complete and he could hand over his electronic devices and enter the portal. He paused for a moment in front of the portal. It seemed a little scary, but he took courage and jumped right in. User identification and code announced him as an Earthling. Identification complete, he collapsed. Sitting on the ground, he thought, how long have I been unconscious? His head felt like it was splitting open. He looked up and found everything strange. It was a bunker. Looking around, he saw several other people. It seemed he was the only one in bad shape. Beside him, he saw a girl who had just gained incredible abilities. Soon, people from various guilds appeared, wanting her to join one of them. Looking around, everything seemed cool. Someone next to him congratulated him on his awakening, asking how he felt. He admitted he didn't feel great, to which the other person reassured him he'd be fine soon. They then inquired if he had checked his abilities yet. He replied that he hadn't, but would do so now. He focused his attention, bringing up his status window. His name was there, along with his stats: strength, agility, vitality, dexterity, and magic, all disappointingly low. He was at least pleased that the status window appeared simply by thinking about it. While the numbers weren't impressive, what truly mattered were his skills. The skill he possessed was a clone summoning technique, the details of which would become clearer with each level gained. Upon discovering the nature of his ability, he fell into deep thought. Moments later, a spark of excitement ignited within him. He reasoned there were likely no restrictions on its use, envisioning its potential applications in everyday life. Upon returning to the others, someone asked if he'd just checked his status. He confirmed, adding that his stats weren't great. The other person told him not to be discouraged unless he wasn't a newbie, as most people started with similar stats. Curiosity piqued. They asked about his skill. "It's a cloning technique," he replied. The other person's expression, Zhang Sangwoo, was unreadable, a mixture of something between satisfaction and disappointment. He asked, from Sangwoo's perspective, whether it was a good skill or not. It wasn't anything to brag about. He watched Sangwoo as he spoke, receiving no response other than a comment that his technique wasn't a phantom. Trying to offer encouragement, Sangwoo added that it was better than having no awakened ability at all. He glanced around at others demonstrating their abilities, a stark contrast to his own. Theirs were impressive, almost overwhelming. He noticed the guild leaders weren't exerting themselves much. Witnessing the scene unfolding around him, a sense of pressure began to weigh on him. All he wanted was to find the exit, but first, he had to complete the digitization and registration process. He was currently in the verification area. He appeared less than enthusiastic. Someone asked if his technique was cloning, and he confirmed, adding that there was a 73% chance he possessed one or more abilities. The process was complete. His awakening certificate was issued and sent to his ID bracelet. Looking at the bracelet, he realized he'd finished faster than expected. His thoughts returned to the cloning technique, wondering what kind of ability it truly was. He glanced to the side, muttering about his babies working hard. He was referring to several computers in a technologically advanced area, all connected to a game. He sat down in a chair and began interacting with the system, observing the game for a while. Then, slumping back, he declared he didn't understand any of it. He mused that the game seemed to be losing popularity daily, its market value plummeting. The pressures of rent and tuition were mounting, driving him to the brink. The thought of someone else doing his work brought his mind back to the cloning technique. He looked at his ID bracelet, resolving to at least give it a try. Standing up, a look of intense concentration settled on his face. He seemed to be gathering energy, mana, or something similar. His body began to react. He willed the clone into existence. Energy surged within him, building in intensity and flowing outwards. It looked like a cloud of energy, and suddenly a bright light appeared. Arms and legs were now visible. Another him appeared, Jiang Shengyun. Seeing this, he seemed surprised. He could clearly see the torso, the thighs, and the feet of the clone he had just created. Even though he was surprised, he was excited because he had successfully cloned himself. He asked the figure in front of him if it was a clone, and received an affirmative response. He also wanted to know if he could swap with it. The clone said yes, and called a master. The young man was thrilled with the first clone he had created. After touching the clone, Jiang Shengyun felt the whole thing was strange. He started slapping himself to make sure he was awake. He touched the clone again, and saw that the body was real, not a hallucination. He asked the clone to put some clothes on. He tossed his shirt and pants. He wondered if it only needed a command, and the clone confirmed it. Jiang Xingyin thought first he would have it sit down. Just then, he realized the clone could hear his thoughts. He just thought about it standing up, and he asked it to do the motion 1,000 times. Even though his clone was extremely tired, the young man noticed the clone's stamina seemed similar to his own. Just then, his phone in his pocket rang. Looking at the phone, he saw it was Konggu randomly sending messages. Konggu wanted to know what ability Jiang Xingyun had gained from lying in bed all day. He held the phone in his hand, just reading the messages. He was curious to know if he had become lazy from lying in bed all day. Judging by his facial expression, the messages would be ignored. Curious to see if there were any changes in his status window after his clone had done all the exercises. On the other hand, jumper George Lucas, the owner of the Blink ability, S-Rank from the USA, the leader of the Illuminati organization, was in the Illuminati's main building. The secretary said that 80% of people awaken for every 300 million people. According to the data from the Awakening Project, they expected 100% of people to awaken within 5 years annually. George Lucas thought 5 years wouldn't be too long. He stood by the window, observing the city from one of the tallest buildings. Meanwhile, his clone started running until it was exhausted. Its existence was obvious, so it was clear that even if it stopped to rest, it was only for a short time. Not to mention, even if someone offered it water, the clone just continued running. It might not be allowed to perform other tasks. Undeniably, this behavior caused some strangeness, which led to people feeling uncomfortable with its actions. It just kept running. Not long after, Jiang Xingyin decided to check his current weight. It should be pointed out that when Jiang felt hungry, he ended up eating twice the usual amount of food, but still managed to lose weight. Undeniably, when they said the ability gained is usually related to, with the help of his clone, Jiang Xingyun noticed a few things. Primarily, the pain and exhaustion the clone experienced didn't affect him. Of course, if he himself were injured or if his energy reserves dipped below a certain threshold, the clone would vanish. He also observed that with every change to his own body, the clone replicated his exact appearance. He could even issue mental commands to the clone from a distance. However, the clone couldn't utilize the cloning ability itself. If it could, there would be an endless army of Jiang Shengyun clones. Seeking more information, he browsed the Awaken Wiki. Through his research, and by examining his own data, he concluded that his attributes increased through training and by issuing commands to the clone. This was a noteworthy discovery. Knowing this, he deduced that if he and his clone worked in tandem, his overall effectiveness would be significantly higher. To delve deeper, he picked up a fitness magazine, its cover catching his eye with a phrased body of steel, reminding him of the builds he sometimes created in games. This sparked a realization. These exercises would be highly effective if overseen by him and performed by the clone. Meanwhile, each time he checked his bank balance on his phone, his worry grew. His funds were dwindling, likely due to the added expense of feeding two bodies. He realized it was time to find a part-time job. He needed to scour online job boards for opportunities. Construction work seemed ideal, physically demanding, providing both exercise and income. Initially, he'd have to work alone, as the clone couldn't handle the application process. After analyzing a few possibilities, one listing immediately grabbed his attention. He initiated contact. The person on the other end told him an interview wasn't necessary. He could start whenever he was available. Though he suggested starting the next day, he was persuaded to join that very day, a clear indication of their desperation for workers. As long as the pay was decent, the outcome wouldn't be much different. Jiang Xingyun and his clone headed towards the logistics center. Upon arrival, he had to devise a plausible explanation for the presence of another person who looked exactly like him. He briefed his clone, providing a name to use and instructions on how to behave. The building was larger than he'd anticipated, and he wasn't sure where to go. Just then, a voice called his name, snapping him to attention. An older gentleman inquired about his presence there. It took the older man, OCO, a moment to recognize Jiang Xingyun, who had lost a considerable amount of weight. After exchanging greetings, OCO led him to the office. The reunion was a surprise for both of them. As they parted ways, they agreed to catch up later. Jiang Xingyun felt a knot of nervousness about the new job. However, he noticed his clone didn't share the same anxiety. Then again, the clone was, for now, unawakened. Even so, Jiang Xingyun longed for the workday to end so he could rush home to his ramen. The shift wasn't long, but he already felt utterly drained. The work felt endless. He glanced around at the others, all of them seemingly built for this heavy lifting. Even his clone could handle it with greater ease. It was clear, even at a glance, that the clone was excelling. After a while, break time finally arrived. Unlike his clone, Jiang Xingyun was already exhausted. Mr. OCO appeared, kindly offering him soda and food. After speaking with OCO, Jiang went to talk to his clone, curious about its chosen name. The clone identified itself as Kim Jiangyu. Returning to OCO, the older man asked Jiang Xingyun what it felt like to be doing this kind of work for the first time as a university student. Jiang simply replied that it was incredibly tiring. Still, OCO remarked on their resilience, as newcomers usually ran off long before this point. Jiang thought to himself that if it weren't for his dwindling bank account, he would have run too. The conversation then drifted to the university Jiang attended. Meanwhile, the clone was busy consuming everything offered to them. Mr. OCO told Jiang not to be modest. He dreamed of his daughter getting into that very university. Jiang told him not to worry, as he wasn't particularly good at studying either, but he'd managed to get in. The possibility of special admissions, mentioned by the older man, fueled his hopes even further. The words, however, left OCO in thought for a moment. Then, he mentioned a job opportunity, asking the young man if he was interested in another part-time position. Jiang needed a moment to consider. To persuade him, OCO suggested that instead of breaking his back at the logistics center, Jiang could tutor his daughter if he was willing. The offer was unexpected. The proposition sounded appealing. Again, if he considered his dwindling funds, he would take the job. He would have to tutor her in all subjects. OCO seemed embarrassed to admit it, but he confessed that his daughter struggled with her studies. The offered rate was 51 yuan for 2 hours, once or twice a week. Considering the time commitment, it wasn't bad. They agreed, and OCO said he would contact him to discuss the details. Stretching felt good. Jiang had a feeling this tutoring gig would work out well. He occasionally checked his status window to see if there were any improvements. This time he was satisfied. He had found a job and a status. Yes, it was good when things worked out after putting in so much effort. He was pleased to have secured another job. He decided to grab a bite to eat before getting back to work. To his surprise, his bag was empty. Looking at his clone, he realized it had devoured everything inside. A clear look of displeasure crossed his face. The clone had been steadily eating. It pulled out the last remnant from a bag and finished off a soda. Though Jiang was thoroughly annoyed, there was nothing to be done. The next morning, His exhaustion was evident. He told himself that everything was incredibly tiring. From that moment on, he would utilize clone number 1 for his part-time jobs. It felt like clone number 1's hard work was enough for now, so Jiang Xingyun sent the clone home. He considered just dismissing it entirely, but that would leave clothes scattered everywhere. He figured he'd think more clearly after eating. Suddenly, he heard a noise at the door and realized clone number 1 had returned. He instructed it to shower and change. Washed and changed, the clone stood before its creator. Jiang had it offer a hand. He knew he had to make a small wound on the clone. He knew that clone number 1, upon being dismissed, would dissolve into light. But that wasn't the whole of it. He found himself trembling just for this simple task of pricking the clone with a small needle. It was just a small prick on one of its fingers. He was performing this procedure, of course, to instantly gain a regeneration status. Afterwards, he'd searched Wiki for extensive information on the procedure he'd just performed. Only by continuing this would any signs manifest. In another month, however, he'd discovered that stitching someone up with a needle was terrifying, but he'd have to do it often. So, he allowed the clone to eat ramen whenever it felt hungry, even requiring it to exercise afterwards. He also gave it another task. He handed over his phone, instructing it to answer every call diligently, as he would be going out soon. Afterwards, he'd be looking for the gym he'd seen advertised in a magazine. Suddenly, someone appeared, calling his name. It was Kim Jiangyu, someone he knew well, though they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Jiang Xingyun wasn't sure it was really him, as Jiang had lost a lot of weight. This was due to his constant workouts. At that moment, he was on his way to the gym. He just had an extra companion now, as Kim was also willing to train. So he asked for the name of the gym. Jiang Xingyun told him it was called The Resistance, and it was nearby. Kim couldn't see anything special about it, apart from the price. However, his companion mentioned that there was a very beautiful trainer there. Even if he didn't want to work out, he would definitely go along. When they arrived, they noticed the usual setup. People exercising, state-of-the-art equipment. At the front desk, they immediately noticed someone eating. Noticing the students entering, the person apologized, explaining it was his lunch break. He very kindly explained the grand opening promotion that was underway. Jiang decided he would take advantage of the 3-month promotion and also wanted supervision while using the equipment. He was told that after payment, everything would proceed as he wished. He walked over to one of the machines. His posture was praised, but the trainer suggested he increase the weight. Meanwhile, another gym member was working out, his performance catching the attention of the two. They chatted nearby, and others' attention was also drawn to the young man. He was exercising intensely. The trainer quickly complimented him, saying he seemed to have been working out for a long time. The trainer, intrigued, asked if he'd been training for a long time, but Jiang Xingyun had only just begun. The conclusion, his awakened state had boosted his muscle-building potential. The young man emphasized that his status rank hovered around 2.1. Jiang Xingyun, observing the conversation, pondered, considering this widespread ability for drastic strength gains, what must higher-ranked hunters be like? Clearly, there was a reason people spoke of hunters with such reverence. He was concluding this train of thought when his phone buzzed. Pulling his phone from his pocket and answering, he realized it was Zhang Diaksu. The man began by asking if he'd gotten home safely and if he had any free time. The moment he knew he was free, Jiang Xingyun confirmed he was fine and suggested Diaksu come over to his place, as he wanted to talk in person. Diaksu was already in the building, waiting for the elevator. Jiang Xingyun mused that even after everything, his friend hadn't signed up at the gym. He couldn't work out properly. He'd make people envious. Actually, that was just a misunderstanding. This setup, while not as ideal as everyone claimed, might be better in a way. He wouldn't have to worry about sending his clone in his place. Stepping off the elevator, he arrived at Diaksu's door, but a commotion erupted from within. He pressed his ear against the door to listen. It seemed Diaksu's daughter was quite upset about the news of getting a tutor. Her father was simply telling her he was leaving, and she could tell the tutor herself that she didn't want any more lessons. The shock on Diaksu's face was evident as he realized he'd hit Jiang Xingyun in the face when he opened the door. His daughter witnessed the whole thing, the door still ajar. They quickly offered him a cold pack for his head, apologizing profusely and assuring him it wasn't intentional. They also offered him a plate of sliced fruit. Just like at his own home, the lady of the house expressed surprise at his slim physique. Finally, Jiang Xingyun was there to tutor their daughter, Hyan. He began to converse with her. An air of awkwardness was unavoidable. Jiang Xingyun introduced himself and, to confirm, asked Hyan if she was interested in attending Kangwon National University. Keeping it brief, she simply affirmed. The next part would be even more awkward, as she had to reveal her grades. To begin the lesson, however, she retrieved her report card. Judging by her performance, her grades were average. Attention shifted to what to discuss next. Seeing an opportunity, Deok-soo excused himself, citing work. With that excuse, the head of the household quickly departed. Jiang Xingyun reviewed Hyan's results and, noticing the young lady's shyness, pointed out that he hadn't achieved great results on his aptitude test either. With that, he managed to ease her embarrassment. Given her improved mood, he declared they would do their best. After the tutoring session, on his way home, he realized he had a long way to go with the young lady. Furthermore, over the next few days, he conducted several more lessons. Hyan was putting in her best effort. After a while, he realized she was smarter than he'd anticipated. Since the top-ranked student wasn't there, he concluded he must be working. He considered the issue of the cell phone. Currently, one clone had it, but if the number of clones increased, things could get complicated. He decided to search online for skills related to the ones he already possessed. He then found a page offering a familiar summoning skill for 100 million won, and another offering a telepathy skill scroll for 400 million won. However, he reasoned that if he had that kind of money, he'd rather buy a house than skills. In that case, he realized it would take a long time to afford either of those skills. Disgruntled by his significantly lower balance, he finally decided to lie down for a bit. He needed to become a hunter. With that thought firmly in mind, he began searching for reports on hunters. His abilities were too good to be wasted on mere manual labor. Fueled by the ambition to become a hunter, he excitedly grabbed his yellow jacket. An event dubbed the Great Calamity by the world's population had vanished, and it had seemed humanity would face extinction. Now, those who hunted the remaining monsters were called hunters. To become one, it was necessary to pass an exam and obtain a nationally recognized license. However, he needed some skills to pass the hunter exam. After a while, he arrived at a place called the Hunter Association. He knew he was in better shape, likely due to unlocking his vitality stat, though he'd only slept for a few hours. The presence of numerous hunters, of all different ranks, was striking. This was quickly noticed by Jiang Xingyun. Not to mention, there were a lot of people waiting to take the exam. Just then, an announcement declared that registration for the Hunter License exam, held in the basement, would close in 20 minutes. All eyes were drawn to the front of the Hunter License room. He knocked on the door, opened it, and was surprised to find many people inside. His only thought was why there were so many people in that place. In fact, he'd successfully caught the attention of some of his competitors. Not to mention, firm footsteps suddenly echoed. Han Myung-hwan had arrived. He introduced himself as a C-rank hunter and the examiner for this exam. The license exam, he explained, consisted of 3 tests: a written exam, a practical exam, and an aptitude test. Furthermore, the exam could only be taken once a year. The officials never forgot cheaters. The pressure was intense. As the hunter license exam commenced, a driver wearing earphones drove and spoke into them. The driver was receiving instructions from his boss, but he seemed to disagree. The boss wasn't very patient. The driver was an employee of the JM agency. Like Jiang Xingyun, he also had financial problems. Furthermore, he'd been keeping an eye on when the hunter exam would end. He was still on the road, even though the results had already been released. The surprising results caught many off guard. Many were saying the exam was surprisingly easy. Yang Sengwoo wondered how that could be. Because the questions were simple, requiring only memorization of a few key points, and they were given ample time of practice, the goal felt within reach. As for the aptitude test, it was like an elementary school ethics test, hardly befitting a job that demanded risking one's life. And the weapons test was easy too, almost as if the government wanted people to pass. He didn't dwell on it, though. At the exit, he noticed the guilds. They were there trying to recruit hunters. Suddenly, one of the representatives congratulated him on passing the hunter license exam. He received a business card from the JM agency. Kang Jun-mo was weighing the possibilities, considering each purchase of items or monster hunt. While listening to the JM agency's pitch, his status window seemed to change. It displayed information about a change in his status. The number of clones he could summon had increased to 2. Realizing this, he told the agent he'd contact them another day. Driving to the place to find work, he found himself talking to himself, but hoped the young man, already at home preparing to clone again, would remember him. Having created another clone, he was eager to see the fruits of clone number 2's labor. The trio were ready to become hunters. Meanwhile, the agent had already managed to distribute most of his business cards. He, too, hoped they would contact him. He was heading to the Hazone Guild, rank number 1 in Korea. Indeed, he had to accept this value according to the agreement on the list. Kong Junimo only took one look to realize that something about the items on the list was strange. Looking over the entire inventory, the values seemed odd. However, this strangeness made the person giving this opportunity uncomfortable. He had to listen. If they followed the rules and did everything they were supposed to, the rest was up to the prophets. He needed to be more astute. They also told him not to be so sensitive about guild matters. Even if he objected to all of this, he had to remain silent and leave. If he had known he would face such difficulties, he would have remained silent. He noticed his phone ringing. Answering the call, he identified himself and then heard that the young man, Kong Sang-won, who had taken his business card, wanted to meet him. The meeting was arranged at a cafe. Upon arriving, he noticed someone was already waiting for him. He apologized for being late and ordered some drinks. While drinking iced coffee, Sang-won expressed his intention to go to a hunting ground that was safe for beginners. Next, he inquired about his abilities. The reply he received was, like others cloning, he had already formed his own opinions and preconceived notions about the cloning ability, believing they couldn't do much physically. He had to reconsider his judgment, saying he thought the ability was amazing and handed over the contract. He also mentioned the first hunting ground he recommended, saying it wasn't dangerous, believing there wouldn't be any problems. This satisfied the client, knowing there was a second hunting ground available for extended hunts. He added that there were other lower-level monsters there as well, like giant rats, for instance. Kong Sang-won analyzed both locations, deeming them ideal for his purposes. He also liked the selling price of the items gathered there. With this, he signaled his intent to proceed with the contract. Since he favored both locations, he was asked to choose one. However, he wouldn't choose just one, and so the real Kong Sang-won appeared alongside his clone. So, the one who signed the contract was the original. The whole situation felt a bit strange. For a better demonstration, he decided to spend time in both locations, as the real Kong Sang-won had now joined the conversation. The agent was quite impressed. Furthermore, he heard that he intended to hunt in both locations. It all reminded him of a time in the past when he had the chance to meet someone with cloning abilities. Back then, it seemed like a truly remarkable thing. It was at that moment he asked to see a demonstration. Next, it was necessary to focus. Other images, identical to the original, appeared. The performance was outstanding. Faced with this extraordinary ability, the agent was deeply impressed. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the man's clones began to prepare for a combined attack. This frightened the agent considerably. Then the attack commenced. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. A short while later, he realized they were illusions, far from being real clones. Even so, he thought he could touch them, but his hand passed through the emptiness of the illusion. However, it didn't cause any real harm. The man believed his ability would be helpful in diverting the attention of monsters. It was at this point the agent concluded he had seen enough of this ability. Now he realized that the ability he had witnessed last time was completely different from this one. After observing Kong Sang-won's clone, he noted that his clone was special, as he hadn't realized it was a clone while looking at the contract. Not even while he was drinking coffee did he realize it. This was the first time he had encountered such an ability. It was so unbelievable that he decided to ask if they were twins. However, he simply found the question amusing. After putting his arm around number 1's shoulder, it seemed reasonable for the agent to think so. He confirmed that it was his clone. He also mentioned that there was another clone currently at the gym. This too was surprising. He didn't have the information that the clones could increase muscle mass. Kong Sang-won claimed that as the clones got stronger, he also became stronger. He admitted he had even raised his own attributes by using the clones. Now, the agent was convinced that this wasn't the ability of an ordinary F-rank hunter. Incidentally, returning to the hunting grounds, there was one more question, which was, whether there would be a problem with the same person entering different locations simultaneously. The agent thought there would be difficulties with simultaneous entry, as there were records of each person's entry. However, hearing these words didn't satisfy him, as he had already thought of a solution to this problem and would communicate it to the Hunter Association. Only the next evening could he demonstrate his abilities, so a meeting at the Hunter Center was scheduled 2 days later. The contract was mentioned, but it had already been sealed. The agent startled his client when he suddenly stood up, but he was simply excited about their collaboration. An agreement was reached between them, and both parties were satisfied. 2 days later, John waited in front of the mentioned building. Shortly after his arrival, General Agent Kong Junimo greeted the hunter. Incidentally, the hunter, whose name had arrived earlier, had actually rushed there so as not to keep the agent waiting, and also because he was eager to see the association within the Hunter Center. Shortly after the tickets were distributed, the hunters were called to the counter by their numbers. When his turn came, he was asked if he wanted dual entry into the hunting grounds, as only then could his abilities be properly utilized, since the clone required another bracelet. Thus, the application for dual entry documents was submitted to the person in charge. After a while, the documents were handed down and had to be submitted to the civil servant's office, followed by testing. The sheer amount of paperwork shocked them both. The kind General Agent Kong Junimo offered to handle the paperwork while John headed to the demonstration room. They proceeded with their respective tasks. Focus was required for the successful completion of this operation. Although he had performed this action several times and knew what he was doing, even so, it was still awkward to see his replica undress in front of the woman conducting the test. Only after passing the test could a bracelet be made for the clone. The request to create an identical bracelet had been fulfilled, thus granting the clone freedom to enter the hunting grounds, making simultaneous entry and exit possible, and wherever the original entered, the clone could enter as well. The engineer showed a clear interest in the clone. However, the clone was taken away by the original, who now possessed the bracelet. This was certainly a pity, as the engineer might have had good ideas for the clone to execute. He felt quite accomplished, showing his arm and declaring that the identity verification was complete. Finally, all the preparations for solo hunting were finished. General Agent Kong Junimo asked him if he was already heading to the hunting grounds. That was the plan, as his schedule was free. Someone was curious as to why number 2 was wearing a mask, especially since many people were interested in him. They were being observed by someone, the guild leader of the Haesung Guild. Shin Haesung wondered who that was and realized it was Junimo. To get his attention, he shouted, calling out Agent Kong Junimo's name. Afterward, he dramatically jumped down from above, landing nearby. The man seemed to know Junimo and remarked that they were meeting there as well. In fact, Mr. Shin Haesung was a very famous person. It was surprising to learn that Junimo was still in the hunting business. Kong Sing-won also recognized the man. Even so, Mr. Kong Junimo, while greeting him, seemed uncomfortable with his presence, out of respect for the hierarchy. This situation brought some amusement to the guild leader, who paused, curious about the boy's presence at that moment. The young man was introduced as a hunter from the association. Looking at the boy in the hoodie, he said he understood and could also tell from his physique that he was F-rank. The man, trying to maintain a serious composure, asked Mr. Junimo what was going on, as he used to oversee S-ranks and D-ranks, and after a good laugh, he couldn't believe he was now looking after an F-rank hunter in a hoodie. Mr. Junimo felt uneasy, and not long after, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was his protege coming to offer support. However, the man took great pleasure in teasing Mr. Junimo, even in front of the individual who was trying to exert his grand presence. The young hunter didn't let his presence diminish, putting on a cheerful expression, showcasing his good nature. He said it was an honor to meet the guild leader of the number 1 guild in the nation. These words pleased the guild leader, who even started to see the young man in a different light. Taking this opportunity, the young man listed the man's accomplishments. Shin Haesung was number 1 in dungeon monopolization, number 1 in hunting ground restrictions, and other facts he knew. He didn't know what to do, standing before such a notorious figure. The guild leader acknowledged the young hunter's courage. After all, the man had quite the presence. To test the hunter's abilities, to see if they were as good as his courage. Zhang Junwoo turned around, noticing the man beside him. He was truly lucky, because just then, the man's assistant came looking for him. He knew the assistant was there, and they couldn't push their luck any further. He simply bid them farewell, but he wanted to do one last thing, and that was to know the young hunter's name. Kong Sang-won, being clever, let the man figure it out himself. The guild leader admitted the young man was somewhat interesting and bid farewell to Mr. Junimo. The assistant informed the guild leader that he couldn't just walk around the association like that. A while later, inside Mr. Junimo's car, he thanked him for the courtesy he had shown earlier. Jang Junwoo mentioned that he couldn't just stand idly by, the relationship between Junimo and the Haesung Guild being paradoxical. A simple search of JM Agency would suffice, but what he saw next caught his attention, as there wasn't much information related to it online. While conducting his research, he stumbled upon a rumor about Agent Kong Junimo, stating that he had been fired from the Haesung Guild. It was now clear why hunters were reluctant to join the agency. It was due to the fear of retaliation from the Haesung Guild. Junimo, having heard this information from Jang Junwoo, was curious as to why he wanted to join the agency. Simply because of the payout ratio, and that he could rely on Junimo if he had anything he couldn't handle in the industry or guild. These words made Mr. Junimo realize his responsibility. Meanwhile, in Gym 2, John was pushing himself to exhaustion, training far beyond his limits. All this exertion made the gym manager incredibly nervous, and others felt uneasy watching someone train so relentlessly. Even with the intense workout, the clone carried on without complaint. Then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his original self. Finish training, shower, and wait in front of the gym at 4 o'clock. Upon receiving the command, he rehydrated and went to carry out the rest of his instructions. The gym trainers breathed a collective sigh of relief as the young man finally eased up on his brutal regime. He'd push himself so hard, the liquid dripping onto the floor looked like shimmering heat haze. Only with the right gear could anyone endure being in there. This effort was all to prepare him for the burden he would carry. Mission accomplished, he left the designated training area. John observed the effort his clone was putting in, reporting back that wearing the mask was incredibly difficult. That's why, even though the slime area was safe, hunters avoided it. John knew he couldn't stay there long. Junimo said he could hunt until the container was full. When it was full, it could be changed at the rented locker. Having a spare suit, however, would help him last longer. He wasn't sure he could manage 2 hours, let alone 6. But if it was number 2, he could. Quickly, he donned the mask and the specialized suit. Number 2 also received support and encouragement from John. Now, he wanted to head to the Horned Rabbit hunting grounds. Next, John noticed that number 1 was gone. He remembered he hadn't picked up number 1, who was waiting in the car at their agreed meeting point by the gym. John was driving, and he asked Junimo if he would continue to refer to the clones as number 1 and number 2. Junimo replied that since they were identical, it would be confusing if they had names. John argued that, since they were clones, names were necessary. He just confirmed with Junimo whether they used weapons to hunt horned rabbits, to which Junimo replied yes. He also wanted to know if he needed to prepare equipment, and he was told it wasn't necessary, as weapons could be rented at the hunting grounds. He also mentioned that one day he should have his own gear. However, he was startled by a voice. John announced that they had finally arrived at the Yujing sand hunting grounds. The place was heavily guarded by security personnel, visible everywhere, guiding the hunters. John remarked that the place was huge, not even comparable to the slime area. Junimo, however, said that was because that area was infamous. A monster invasion had occurred there. Thinking about it, John thought he'd heard about it before. Essentially, the portal had become disconnected from the outside world. Junimo explained that during the invasion, most of the powerful monsters had been defeated, leaving only F-rank and E-rank monsters. Junimo wondered if the noise would cause complaints. The two of them entered the hunting grounds. It was vast and crowded. Pointing to a shop, Junimo told John he could rent equipment there. It was quite large and bustling with activity. Gesturing towards a shop, Junimo informed John that he could rent equipment there. The vendor stated that the rifle, night vision goggles, range rental, earplugs, and 400 rounds of ammunition would cost a total of 700,001. Jang Junwoo winced at the exorbitant price. Junimo explained that the ammunition accounted for most of the cost, but assured him it would be reimbursed when he bagged some horned rabbits, their value comparable to a barrel of slime. Consulting the map, Junimo directed them to the 3rd floor of F building. Junwoo, surprised, admitted he hadn't realized the area was divided divided into sections. Junimo simply confirmed they had arrived. This was their designated spot. A sudden, sharp crack startled Junwoo. The area teemed with hunters. Some fired repeatedly, missing their marks. Others proudly displayed their kills. A few had clearly enjoyed a successful haul. Junwoo watched their activity, captivated. Junimo's voice broke through his fascination, directing him to station number 4. He then asked Junwoo, with a touch of challenge in his voice, how confident he felt about his marksmanship. Junwoo bristled. "Who do you think I am?" He retorted. "I only missed 3 shots during the entire hunter exam." "Those poor rabbits," he muttered, adjusting his gear and settling into position. "No rabbit can escape the hawk eyes of Yujang San," he declared dramatically. Junimo was grateful the other hunters wore earplugs, sparing them from the pronouncements. John, peering through the scope, spotted a target. "Found one," he announced to Junimo. Slowly, deliberately, he lined up the shot, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Sorry, little guy," he whispered. 3 hours later, back in the hunting grounds, despair gnawed John. He hadn't hit a single rabbit. "They're the reason I'm failing," he grumbled. "My aim is perfect, but they seem to hear something. The moment I fire, they bolt." The rabbits were gone. Even Junimo had left. Unable to recoup his expenses, John wondered if he should just cut his losses. He called number 1, instructing his clone to take over the hunt. "Text 1 if you catch a rabbit," he directed. "Call if you run out of ammo." Exhausted, he sighed. "Time to go home," he mumbled. Back at his apartment, sprawled on his bed, he checked the system for mana increase notifications. "At least number 2 is doing a good job with the slimes," he thought. Checking the status, he noted a steady increase. The memory of Shin Haesung's condescending amusement stung. "I still have a long way to go," he admitted. Waking up, the rabbit hunt debacle was his first thought. He hadn't anticipated such difficulty. Preparing for sleep, he hoped number 1 had managed to bag at least 1 rabbit while he slept. His phone buzzed. A flurry of messages from number 1 filled the screen. The scene shifted to the next day at the JM agency. Junimo sat calmly until the ringing phone interrupted him. He answered, identifying himself and the agency. The voice on the other end confirmed. JM agency, the hunter agency. Kong Sang-won, the self-proclaimed manager of the slime hunting grounds, had someone summoned Junimo to the grounds. Junimo, puzzled, inquired why he was needed. The manager explained that John had been hunting continuously for over 24 hours. Junimo, flustered, quickly assured him he'd be there as soon as possible. Meanwhile, back at his apartment, John woke up feeling strangely refreshed. He checked his phone to see how number 1, his clone, was faring. John stared blankly for a moment, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of messages. Skimming through them, he found the reports hard to believe. At the slime hunting grounds, Junimo seemed equally astonished by the sheer quantity of slime collected. John, or rather, his clone, had slaughtered slimes by the hundreds, filling canister after canister with their gelatinous remains. In a single day, the clone had filled every available storage container. The surrounding soldiers watched in disbelief, awestruck by the feat the clone, coated in slime residue, stood amidst the carnage. Junimo excitedly called John to report the good news. John answered, sounding somewhat detached, yet pleased. Junimo, impressed by the clone's efficiency, suggested he could call off the hunt. John, relieved, agreed, then inquired about sending a cleaner to the horned rabbit hunting grounds. Surveying the mountain of horned rabbit carcasses, John muttered, "The bodies are practically blocking the path." The onlookers gaped at the sheer scale of the slaughter. Some eyed the pile greedily, contemplating pilfering a carcass or two. Others openly questioned whether he had truly hunted all these horned rabbits alone. Intrigued by this display of prowess, a recruiter approached the clone. With practiced ease, the recruiter presented his business card. "Have you considered joining a guild?" he asked number 1. Without instructions on how to respond, number 1 simply ignored him. The recruiter, attempting to maintain his composure, rationalized the silence. Talented individuals are often eccentric, he thought. Another recruiter nearby chuckled. "Don't bother. He doesn't talk." He gestured towards the other recruiters who had tried and failed to engage the clone. Even the big guilds have been brushed off, he added. As the recruiters gossiped, one of them discreetly approached number 1 and offered him more ammunition. Having dispatched his clone to continue the hunt and left Junimo to deal with the mountain of carcasses, John commended the clone's exceptional work. The clone, visibly pleased by the praise, swiftly reloaded his rifle and returned to the hunt. The onlookers watched, surprised. They had clearly underestimated the clone's dedication. Even at 50% capacity, technically limited to half of what John himself could do, the clone operated with machine-like precision, utterly focused, making decisions without hesitation. Meanwhile, his student, Heian, had been relentlessly trying to reach him. "What are you thinking so hard about?" she demanded. He deflected, complimenting her progress, but she persisted, wanting to know what occupied her teacher's thoughts. Downplaying his activities, John casually mentioned he was just reflecting on his performance at the hunting grounds. Heian, surprised and excited, was thrilled to discover her teacher was a hunter. Feigning forgetfulness, he admitted he hadn't mentioned it before and that he was still quite new to it. Intrigued, she asked him about the highest-ranked hunters. A new hunter, nicknamed God's Hawkeye, had apparently taken shots from Ujingsan Mountain, but when asked, he claimed ignorance. He explained that this hunter was one of the most searched hunters on the Hunter Wiki that day, having bagged over 200 rabbits. This mysterious hunter was cool because he didn't speak a word to anyone, and this air of mystery was precisely why he was so popular. However, after watching the videos they made about this mysterious hunter, he was surprised by the nickname. He was talking to Heian, whose dream was to become a hunter. Heian asked if she had awakened her abilities yet. She replied with a confident yes, adding that she had her license but was too scared to go to the hunting grounds. After a moment of silence, she hesitantly asked John if he would take her hunting if she did well on her exams. He confidently replied that it wouldn't be a problem as long as she passed her college entrance exams. A visibly excited Heian asked if he was serious. He confirmed, explaining that he knew some safe hunting grounds. She demanded a promise. John considered for a moment, then made a pinky promise. She declared that he couldn't change his mind now. Leaving Heian's room, John bumped into her mother. She asked if the lesson went well, and he replied that it did. Curious about what they were talking about, Heian pressed her ear against the door. He said goodbye and was about to leave, but Heian's mother asked if he wanted to eat something before he went. He declined, saying he had somewhere to be. Still listening from behind the door, an overjoyed Heian threw herself onto her bed, giddy with the thought that she had a date with John. She mused to herself that he was a hunter, and thanks to that, the conversation had gone so smoothly. She hadn't liked him at first because he knew her father, but his image was pleasing. He had a good vibe, taught well, and seemed honest. Plus, she thought he was handsome. She didn't understand it herself, so she would study hard to impress him. Already at the Horned Rabbit hunting grounds, John rode the elevator, wondering if they had collected the rabbit carcasses yet. Junimo was surprised to see Junwoo arrive. Junwoo asked if Junimo was there too. Junimo replied that he was, as he had to check the collection process, and asked where Junwoo had been. Junwoo replied that he had been tutoring. Junimo remarked that he had called many collection teams before, but never this many at once. A total of 352, and there were a lot of people. Junimo asked if he had checked the payment yet, but Junwoo said he hadn't, as he had turned off his notifications. The bank balance on his phone screen displayed 32,720,301. John stared at his phone, stunned, in disbelief. He asked if the amount was really correct. Junimo replied that because his hunting skills were so good, he had raised the reward to the level of a C-rank hunter. Junwoo thanked him, mentioning that he wasn't even C-rank yet. Suddenly, a man caught their attention, causing everyone to look at him, curious about what he was doing. The man asked Junimo if he was the manager. Gesturing towards number 1, Junimo confirmed that he was and asked the man who he was. The man said he was a hunter whose prey had been stolen. He claimed that all the horned rabbits he had targeted had been taken. He demanded they compensate him for his losses, a sweating Junimo pondering what to do. He told John he thought they'd chosen the wrong place, John replying that he didn't even know people like this existed. John stood there, thinking, Suddenly, he said he had an idea. Junimo asked what the idea was. The man asked what they were muttering about. The man said he wasn't bad, just wanted 10% of the total payment. John scoffed at the man's words. Provoked, the man asked what he was laughing at. John told him to relax, because the guy wouldn't be coming back. He said they should leave in a few days, but the man angrily asked where they were going. Junimo also asked where they were going. John replied they were going to a nearby cafe. The man, enraged, turned and tried to punch John, yelling at him not to ignore him, but John commanded number 1 to step in front. Number 1 jumped in front of the punch, taking it head-on, and went flying, crashing into numerous obstacles along the way until he hit a building pillar. He was likely injured after colliding with several things along the way. The man said, shocked, that he hadn't hit him that hard. John, filming a video, called the man wicked, drawing attention to him. John asked Junimo if, in the sacred hunting grounds, people would let this kind of violence slide. Junimo replied that they wouldn't. The man tried to deny what he'd done, but everyone had seen it. John said if this video was uploaded to the Hunter website, it would be really bad, and he needed to take care of this, because it could damage his and the guild's reputation. John asked him if he was right and placed his hand on the man's shoulder, and told the man to go his own way. The man agreed, still fuming. Life went on. John wondered if he was from the Haesung Guild. Junimo said yes. He thought the man was from the Haesung Guild. John asked if there were people like that in the Haesung Guild. Junimo replied that since the guild was large, there were all sorts of people. But how did John know the man was from the Haesung Guild? Junimo said that ever since they arrived at the hunting grounds, the man had been watching them. He said it must have been the Haesung Guild. John said it was retaliation. Junimo said John was right. They must have thought number 1 was another hunter who had signed a contract with him. He said that even before hiring the JM Agency hunters, they had been harassed. The JM Agency hunters didn't stay long and left, with only a few F-rank hunters remaining. He added that even now, he couldn't guarantee there wouldn't be sabotage from the Haesung Guild. John said he already knew that before working with him, so not to worry, as he wouldn't betray him. John said he wouldn't let them threaten him and mentioned he had a plan to get stronger quickly. He began to explain the details of his plan. However, the agent thought it all sounded dangerous, but he continued to listen to every dangerous detail of the plan. John asked him what he thought of the plan. Junimo said he'd never thought of it that way and asked if meeting at 2 in the afternoon at Zhong's place would work. Zhong replied that the time was perfect and said they would meet at the Hunter's Market. The Monster Hunter's Market, which handled hunters' weapons and other parts and equipment, had been bustling ever since Awakened Ones appeared. But a kind of department store had entered the Hunter's Market and taken over a portion of the industry, as they possessed all the equipment a hunter could possibly want. He equipped a set of armor, and a shopkeeper explained that it was titanium alloy armor, sure to withstand attacks from monsters, adding that the armor was light and comfortable. He turned his attention to daggers, noting that since he mainly fought using his abilities, a titanium alloy dagger would suffice. Since the clones needed more equipment, he requested 2 more sets of the same armor, which the shopkeeper quickly prepared. He shifted the topic, asking if Zhong needed some abilities, which Zhong confirmed. Mr. Junimo also inquired about familiar abilities, though he hadn't expected to find them there. Even so, they searched the shop, looking over some ability orbs. Looking carefully to find a suitable ability, Zhong found a good one. Upon further inspection of the description, he noticed the hefty price tag of the ability orb. The high price disheartened Zhong, and he somewhat awkwardly asked Mr. Junimo for an advance. Mr. Junimo said, a little reluctantly, that he could lend up to 50 million. Zhong said that would help, and he could manage the remaining amount. Mr. Junimo told him to pay in installments and not to worry, as they could recoup the money quickly if everything went according to plan. Back at his house, Zhong analyzed the orb for a while, then studied the instructions. To acquire the ability contained within the orb, one needed to inject mana into it or press a button. He opted for the activation button, as he couldn't control mana, and placed his hand on the orb. With a hesitant glance, he slowly pressed the activation button. A blinding light emanated from the orb, intensifying until it engulfed the entire room. The familiar ability was successfully created, the power of the ability being to share senses with a chosen target. John stared at his hands for a moment until he noticed the ability orb was gone, having been used. He simply clenched his fists, anticipating testing his new skill, and immediately summoned his clones. Number 1 and Number 2 quickly appeared in response to his summons, still clad in their new armor. He called his clones to test the new ability together, and later met with Mr. Junimo, saying he'd thought of an idea to get stronger faster. John asked him what he thought of the plan. Mr. Junimo readily stated that the results were excellent, far exceeding expectations. However, he highlighted the clones' exceptional dexterity, energy, and reactions, which had yielded unexpected results. He even brought up a recent incident where Zhong had ordered the clones to take a punch from another hunter and react. Not only was the clone's reaction time perfect, but it could have overpowered the other hunter. The question was whether he meant that even with low stat values, the clones had excellent body control. Zhong confirmed this and said he would use this to his advantage. Junimo, slightly bewildered, asked him how he planned to do that. Zhong began to explain that, first, he needed 2 places as training grounds to practice his melee and range combat skills. One clone would attend hand-to-hand combat classes, and the other clone would go to the shooting range. To practice biathlon, of course, he would take the clones' training to a new level so they could surpass their limits. They would skip the theory and go straight to practice. At the fighting class, the instructor demonstrated how to disarm an opponent, while the shooting instructor was teaching clay pigeon shooting. Clone number 1 would duel directly with the instructor. Clone number 2 would practice clay pigeon shooting with a real handgun. Each clone was ready to start training, clone number 1 with his baton, and clone number 2 with a real handgun. Both clones were incredibly calm. The training began at the instructor's command. Clone number 1 disarmed his opponent almost instantly. At the same time, clone number 2 hit the target with ease. This left the respective instructors astonished. The clones remained expressionless. Zhong concluded that he needed the familiar skill. Zhong didn't understand why. After all, it was a skill to share vision with a pet. What would he use it for? Zhong added that all senses were shared through this skill. All sensations would be connected. He told Junimo to imagine Zhong using this skill while the clones were fighting or practicing shooting. Then, he would only need to concentrate. He activated the familiar skill while focusing his mind. The skill triggered, connecting the sensations between him and his clones. At that moment, he could experience all of his clone's sensations. So, he connected with clone number 1. From clone number 1's intense focus to the ideal distance in combat, the angle of his joints, the balance of his body, John felt clone number 1's every dodge. He continued, feeling clone number 2's movements and the flow of power. He could feel the breathing during the shot, the aiming and the direction of his gaze, how to hold the weapon correctly, controlling the recoil of the weapon and everything else. He could feel all of his clone's movements. John slowly opened his eyes. He had felt every single sensation of his clones. Now, he could access all the information the clones had gathered. From that moment on, he would possess all the information the clones collected. He could now gain everything they could offer by using that item. He could already see the initial results and the experience he had just lived through. He felt the air pressure as the baton passed by the clone. Even the smell of gunpowder and the recoil, including the fatigue that was now affecting him. Even without moving himself, everything was accomplished by the clones. Simply by sharing their senses, experiencing their movements, inhabiting their bodies. He was already able to mimic their actions. In that moment, he also elevated his own attributes. Seeing the results, he decided to try combat and shooting. Connecting with number 1, he could see the person he was fighting. Focusing his mind, he activated the familiar skill. This way, he could connect with the clone in another location while the clone was in combat. It was a tough lesson. The instructor, seeing him observing the clone, could also perceive his power. The students were confused when the instructor personally decided to fight the clone. Both were ready to begin the fight. With sharp movements and firm resolve, the instructor noticed a lack of experience in the clone's attacks. But the defense was different. The clone was reading the movements and dodging perfectly. Noticing this, the instructor began to increase the pressure. He used his good defense to attack the clone. In this way, he displayed considerable power. At one point, the clone began to follow the same strategies the instructor was using, and so he too began to attack. In that moment, it could be said he was mirroring the instructor's movements, allowing the instructor to increase the pressure as the clone could defend himself. The blows became stronger and stronger. Even so, the clone managed to dodge, surprising all the other students. The clone pressed closer and closer to the instructor, even managing to land a few blows. For a time, this made the instructor a little uncomfortable. He felt the pressure. Seeing an opening as his opponent grew confident in landing hits, the instructor prepared a counterattack, and so the clone's attack missed its mark. Without even understanding what had happened, he suffered a masterful counterattack. The instructor was tough on him. The other students knew the instructor was an exceptional individual. All the results of the fight were transmitted in real time to the original. Smiling, the instructor, finding the situation perilous, asked if the clone wanted to continue. Zhong asked number 1 if he was alright. In that moment, he only gained momentum and repeated the jump the instructor had just performed. It seemed all his movements were impressive. This surprised his opponent. Zhong also thought his clone was very bold. After the jump, he stopped in front of the instructor and asked him for another round. However, this made his instructor proud. After achieving this result, he moved on to number 2's experience. He concentrated to connect with him. He was shooting at a target. After apparently hitting the target, he felt fulfilled. Even his partner celebrated. John, upon joining that experience from the beginning, realized that number 2 was even shooting at the target of the person next to him. However, he would only focus on the shooting. He shared the same feeling. Keeping his upper body perfectly still, Zhong instructed clone number 1 to remain motionless, rotating only in the direction of the target's trajectory. When the aim aligned with the projected path, he told the clone to memorize every minute detail. Zhong was determined to use every opportunity afforded by the clones to refine his own movements. He needed to concentrate, but the constant effort of switching between the clones was becoming exhausting. He realized his mana was depleted, a wave of dizziness washing over him, and called for a break. The clones' movements were fierce, uninhibited by hesitation or fear. Next time, he decided he would join them, curious to experience the training firsthand. From a distance, he spotted Junimo. He called out to her immediately, surprised to see her there. It was a pleasant surprise, though a flicker of worry crossed his mind about her being out so late. She claimed she'd been studying at the library. He suspected it was a lie, but she insisted she'd finished her assignments. Meanwhile, a group of rough-looking men were talking about Zhong. They seemed to be waiting for him. Elsewhere, someone was tailing Kong Jinmo and reporting on the situation. He apologized, explaining he'd only meant to intimidate, but it turned out the encounter was being recorded. The caller tried to explain, but the person on the other end was far from pleased. Despite his assurances that he would handle it, the man issued new orders. Stay away from the Egyptian battlefield. The instructions were clear. Whatever happened, the higher-ups were to remain uninvolved. There was a hint of disdain. He was told he'd be seen as nothing more than a street thug. Then the call ended. Furious, the man hurled his phone against the wall. It clattered to the ground, and he began to stomp on it. Still seething, he was ready to take matters into his own hands. The ringleader wondered what had happened and why he was so angry this time. It had been a while since their last meeting, and he even put on a friendly face. He wanted to know why he'd been left out in the cold, despite having left to join the nation's top-ranked guild. Because the guild didn't want him too close to the hunting grounds, they needed to know if there was still work for him there. They talked, and they were willing to find him some work. They were in the middle of their conversation when a scene across the street caught his eye. It was Zhong, talking with his student. The man recognized the young man who had recorded the video. He was likely looking to settle the score. He watched from afar. His companion asked if the boy relaxing over there was the one. Zhong was talking to Hyun, who asked him why he was there. Someone caught their attention. He walked towards them, bringing up the matter of his brother. Finally, tired of talking from a distance, the men decided to approach. The student wondered who the men approaching them were. After everything that had happened, the man behind the leader was furious. Zhong used telepathy to call clone number 1 and clone number 2, realizing he needed backup. He then asked the men confronting them if they were willing to help. While their leader appeared calm, one of the men grew agitated. He, presumably Junimo, said he'd heard Zhong had a video showing his older brother making a mistake. He claimed that if the video was deleted, they would leave peacefully. Zhong held up his phone and asked if that was all they wanted. If the video was deleted, everything would be fine, he confirmed. However, he added there was no guarantee they would let them go even if he did delete it. The leader found Zhong shrewd. He commented that the young man wasn't an amateur, and getting away unscathed wouldn't be easy. However, since the young man wasn't smart enough to delete the video after filming it, it was too late now. Zhong told his student, presumably He-han, to run when the opportunity arose. Looking at the man, he could see a certain resolve. He hadn't expected to be in such a predicament so soon. The difference now was that he was going to fight them. This declaration caused them to scoff. The leader told his men to deal with the arrogant boy. In the first attack, Zhong managed to dodge. However, the following attacks came swiftly, and he couldn't evade them all. The fight was 2 against 1, and for someone as inexperienced in combat as him, it quickly became worrisome for He-han, who, after taking a few blows, collapsed to the ground. Despite her efforts, her first real fight wasn't going well. Both the student and her mentor were down. Unclear on what was happening, a power began to coalesce. He-han told them to back off. Zhong, too, was surprised to realize the young woman was using her powers. He also noticed she was still a novice, because she was trembling. 2 of the 3 men pursuing them were shocked that there was an awakened among them. However, the leader told them not to be afraid of a mere high school girl. He asked He-han if they wouldn't back down from what she was about to do. He-han was undeterred by the power he was displaying. Left with no other choice, she threatened again to unleash her power if he came any closer. He ignored her warning, leaving her no choice but to attack. The attack was aimed at the man who was approaching. The other 2 were startled, fearing for him. He was enveloped in smoke for a moment. However, to him, awakened were apparently as common as pebbles. After the attack, his clothes were scorched, so he couldn't exactly brag about the encounter. He remarked that while she had tried to attack him, the young woman still had a lot of growing to do. Her mentor, Zhong, intervened as their fight wasn't over yet. But this time, he managed to land a solid blow on his target, much to his student's surprise. He wasn't playing around. Stunned by the punch, the man, presumably named Gunsuk, staggered back, clutching his face. His friend yelled out, ready to retaliate, focused entirely on rushing Zhong. The clone knew he had to fight like clone number 1. Watching his opponent's shoulders, he realized he needed to move preemptively. To evade the attack, he managed to dodge, thinking simultaneously that an attack wasn't just about swinging arms. It was a flow of power from legs to waist, waist to arms. He landed a blow, sending his opponent flying. As he attacked, another opponent charged in. Unable to dodge, he attacked his opponent while simultaneously being struck. Even after the impact, he remained standing, breathing heavily, unlike his exhausted opponent. Gunsuk commented that he knew how to fight, muttering about his hesitation to hit someone who didn't even know how to throw a punch. Kong, still feeling the sting of the last blow, prepared to continue fighting. He acknowledged landing a hit, but judging by the force, his opponent must have some kind of strength enhancement ability. He couldn't afford to be hit again. Charging forward, he declared, "Here I come." Gunsuk responded, "Bring it on." Zhong narrowly dodged and managed to counter, demonstrating his own skill. Gunsuk, enraged, cursed at Zhong and lunged, intending to grab and pummel him. Leaping back, Zhong evaded the attack and simultaneously landed a punch, complaining under his breath. Gunsuk attempted a retaliatory swing, but Zhong, fist already cocked, met it head-on, striking Gunsuk squarely. Zhong yelled out Gunsuk's name. After landing the punch, Zhong noticed something. Gunsuk was frothing at the mouth with rage. Mustering all his strength for a devastating blow, he growled, "You're finished." Zhong knew he had to dodge this one. Suddenly, something grabbed his leg. Looking down, he saw one of Gunsuk's friends holding him. He realized he was in trouble, but his eyes remained fixed on the larger man. Gunsuk, with all his might, slammed his fist into Zhong, who gasped for air. A cry escaped Zhong's lips as he was sent flying backward, his flight finally arrested by a nearby pillar. Zhong knelt on the ground, gasping, "I can't breathe." Gunsuk sneered, "How do you like that?" Struggling to lift his head and breathe, Zhong watched as Gunsuk prepared to attack again. Suddenly, only smoke remained where Gunsuk had been standing. He'd been hit from behind. Confused as to what had saved him, Zhong looked around. It was He-han, who had used all her strength to intervene. Gunsuk's friends, witnessing this, cursed and advanced on her, intending to take her down. But just then, clone number 1 and clone number 2 arrived, dispatching the opponents before He-Han even understood what was happening. As she stared at the strangely intense clones, she glanced back. Gunsuk couldn't believe what he was seeing. He gasped Zhong's name, finally able to breathe again. Cursing, Gunsuk charged, his vision blurred with rage. Zhong leaped up, ready to attack, grateful to Gunsuk for serving as a practice dummy. He landed a kick squarely against Gunsuk's face, sending him sprawling onto the ground, breathless and exhausted. Gunsuk lay there, missing a few teeth, his friends scattered around him in similar states of disarray. His status window appeared, and he gazed at the system panel with satisfaction. But then, abruptly, he collapsed. His clones and He-Han rushed to his side. Later that night, he awoke. Walking with He-Han, he asked why she hadn't run when she had the chance. He assumed she wanted to discuss her powers. She confessed her surprise, admitting she couldn't believe the infamous rookie hunter was a clone. Zhong urged her to keep the information to herself. She questioned if he disliked fame. He explained that similar situations might arise again. She said she understood, and that she could keep a secret. When they arrived, Zhong asked if they were at her home. She confirmed. He inquired about her hand, if she could still hold a pen. She replied it was her left hand, so it was all right. He commented on her injuries, and she cheekily asked if he could lighten her homework load. He retorted, asking if she hadn't finished it already. She grumbled that his memory was only sharp at times like these. Zhong thanked He-Han, surprising her. He explained that if it weren't for her, he wouldn't have one. She, however, was already boasting about her contribution, suggesting a celebratory barbecue. He promised to treat her later. She declared it a promise, mentioning she was going inside, waving goodbye. He assured her she'd have plenty of meat. He walked on, his clones trying to remain silent, until he noticed them trailing behind. He reminded them they were clones, not shadows, and told them to get to work. The clones informed him that all the training grounds were closed. He bent down, picking up 2 sticks from a bush, and declared they could train in the park. 1 month later, Mr. Junimo was on the phone with Zhong. He inquired about the progress of Zhong's plan. Zhong declared it a resounding success, going on to say that even he could hit a target with a handgun now, and his abilities had improved. Mr. Junimo congratulated Zhong on his achievements, adding that with clone number 3, he could learn even more, even faster. The status window clearly showed the increase in all attributes. Zhong told Mr. Junimo he'd be amazed when he saw the stat boosts. He also asked if it was possible to secure 3 E-rank hunting grounds for tomorrow. Though surprised by the request, he replied it wouldn't be a problem. He'd acquire the hunting grounds by any means necessary. As for the timing, he needed the grounds then. Zhong explained the clones would train in the morning and hunt in the afternoon. Then he promptly hung up. He instructed his clones to train their lower and upper bodies and their cardio. He ordered them to the park and to ensure they returned within 12 hours. They were also to leave their weapons behind. Meanwhile, Khan studied monster hound hunting through the clones' training. He could see they were learning well, almost capable of replicating anything. So, what happens if he starts studying the characteristics of these monsters and how to properly hunt them? Zhong began researching various techniques and tutorials on clone hunting. Returning home, they were exhausted, and he didn't realize the time until the clones arrived back. Seeing their fatigue, Zhong, still thinking they were full of energy, told them to go eat. Zhong had looked over many F-rank hunting guides and expected his clones to be able to hunt based on them. He wanted to try hunting to acclimate to combat, utilizing familiar skills and studying mana during breaks. Just then, he received a message that Mr. Junimo would arrive in 10 minutes. So he urged the clones to hurry up and eat and get ready. The clones prepared themselves just in time. Mr. Junimo commented on how intimidating the clones looked. Zhong inquired if the 3 hunting grounds were ready. Mr. Junimo replied that they were, and that the hunting grounds were nearby. As they parted ways, Zhong asked Mr. Junimo to look after the clones for him. Mr. Junimo asked Zhong why he wasn't coming along. Zhong said he would participate remotely using familiar skills, and that he had to learn the breathing technique. Mr. Junimo left with the clones, and Zhong prepared to do his part. He used the tutorial to practice developing his mana breathing technique step by step, trying his best to concentrate. He used the sensation he felt when using his familiar and clone abilities as a base. Building upon this feeling and staying focused, he seemed to sense something. Gradually, he felt mana circulating within his body. The sensation grew stronger and stronger, integrating into him until he could clearly feel it. Meditative mana, restore mana, increasing the effects of mana breathing and reducing mental fatigue. At one of the F-rank hunting grounds, a hunter was crawling, trying to escape an anomalous monster. The monster was clearly too powerful to be in an F-rank dungeon. Besides the hunter, the monster would also attack weaker monsters. This needed to be reported to the authorities. However, the giant mutated fish wasn't about to let the man escape so easily. The hunter, exasperated, continued to slowly try and flee, terrified to see the monster right behind him. Faced with the inevitable, impending end, he could only weep. His final scream echoed through the dungeon. A car stopped in front of a hunting ground. It was Mr. Junimo at the last hunting ground, the sewage treatment plant. This was the site for hunting alien fish, known for their strong jaws. He bid farewell to clone number 3, telling him to be careful. Mr. Junimo messaged Zhong, letting him know he had dropped off the clones at each hunting ground. Zhong then reflected to himself. The skill to be able to hunt in 3 different places is incredible, he muttered. Depending on the results of this hunt, the hunter industry will start to buzz. At Zhong's home, he was elated, feeling like a genius for acquiring the mana breathing technique. The tutorial said to stay focused and maintain the breathing, careful not to muddle the breathing technique. Then he realized he'd been mistaken. Mastering the mana breathing technique was proving far more difficult. He noted the notification that his clones were already in their respective hunting grounds and prepared to participate remotely. He focused, letting the mana flow, and activated the familiar skill. His senses connected to clone number 1. Zhong was startled by the sudden rush of sensations, until he realized it was just clone number 1 hunting a monster. Sensing how easily clone number 1 was hunting, Zhong wondered if the hunting guides were actually all that helpful. He saw a large group of monster rats approaching. This was the perfect opportunity to test if his theory was correct. He recalled the tutorial videos he'd watched about giant rats, how they were described as one of the most annoying monsters in F-rank. The experienced hunter in the video had said that if anyone planned to hunt rats, teaming up was highly recommended. But if there was no other choice but to go solo, there were other effective hunting methods. First, they moved in straight lines, so keeping a distance and shooting was the best option. Following this advice, clone number 1 drew his pistol without hesitation. He fired at the monsters. The hunter in the tutorial continued, explaining that when it was impossible to take them all down from afar, and close combat became necessary, avoid attacking the head. A rat skull was too hard. The ideal target was the spine. Clone number 1 accomplished this with ease. Taking one down was easy, but of course, they always appeared in swarms, as their breeding rate and numbers were as prolific as ordinary rats. The tutorial ended with the hunter in the video saying that, for those learning, giant rats were just experience points. In the background of the video, another hunter pointed out that aiming while the monsters were moving wasn't easy, but clone number 1's accuracy far surpassed human capability. He fired without any worry of missing, precisely hitting the rat's spines. As expected, only by using his techniques could the clones hunt. However, they didn't show surprise or fear. They were also hunting without considering the opponent's rank. It simply roamed around and sent out hunting signals. Now that he had experienced hunting using the familiar skill, in that sense, his status window was always up to date. Therefore, his clones were likely becoming stronger. That was his goal for the day, to deplete that F-rank monster territory. Meanwhile, other hunters who entered the area encountered a very calm place. They discovered a large number of horned rabbits and wondered how much they were all worth. Meanwhile, Zhong's hunting party couldn't understand why they felt like they'd forgotten something. But suddenly, they remembered what they had forgotten. They hadn't collected any horned rabbits yet. They had been hunting continuously. He requested clones number 1, 2, and 3 to return and gather all the horned rabbits they had hunted so far. He ordered them to stop hunting and put all the prey into crates. However, he thought that some might have already taken the heads. He noticed that clone number 3, despite seeing alien fish, hadn't caught them. When asked why, clone number 3 simply said he hadn't hunted them. John said they could each make some money, that now wasn't the time for honesty, and he also realized that clone number 3 hadn't hunted it. But who would butcher something like that? One of the clones voiced his suspicion, thinking it wasn't an alien fish, but still believed it should be taken. However, Zhong recognized it as someone's upper limb. One of the clones noticed something different, an alarm going off nearby. Hearing the noise, he adjusted his position. he saw a piece of the alien fish being thrown out. That's when he realized the enormous fish was using smaller fish as bait to lure other fishermen. Before he could even process the thought, he was struck by the alien creature. In that attack, it ripped off his right upper limb. Immediately, the pain hit him. At that moment, Zhong also felt as if he had suffered the same fate as his clone. He was still trying to understand what had happened, what the searing pain in his right arm was. Yet, when he looked at his arm, it was intact, but the pain he felt was unbearable, so much so that he curled up in a corner. He realized that the connection had been inadvertently severed due to the intense pain he felt, but now wasn't the time to think about that. Afterward, he immediately contacted Agent Junimo, wanting to know which hunting ground clone number 3 was in. He was reported to be at the sewage treatment plant. In Incheon, Zhong asked the agent to immediately bring clone number 1 and 2 to that location as he was getting ready to head out. He knew something was wrong. Meanwhile, clone number 3 was face to face with the enormous monster, and he was clearly on the defensive. He had never experienced anything like it before, and the giant, fish-like monster was right in front of him. Elsewhere, not far away, John had just arrived. He had come by taxi. He stood before the city's sewage treatment plant. At first, he couldn't imagine such a monster existing in such a tranquil place. But the disconnection with clone number 3 made him anxious. Checking his status, he realized it would be a long time before he could use his abilities again. Upon arriving, they asked him for his identification bracelet. To his relief, the agent was already there, having arrived before him. With him were clone number 1 and 2. The agent wanted to know what was going on, and Zhong quickly explained that it had to do with clone number 3's disappearance. When the agent heard there was a monster there, he was startled. The agent seemed to know what it was. He commented that they should alert the authorities and close off the area for the time being, as it was a murloc. He explained that it held the same D-rank classification, and even a group of C-rank hunters wouldn't be enough to hunt the monster. The young man was also focused on preventing other hunters from entering, but they would only do so after his clones had entered the portal. He was worried about clone number 3 and couldn't just sit and wait. He asked the agent to trust him this time, just as he trusted his clones. He activated the familiar skill so he could give direct commands to clone number 1 and 2. The team dispatched to locate clone number 3 received their first order. Proceed to the clone's last known location. Clones number 1 and 2 advanced towards the area, one signaling to the other to hold back and listen for any disturbance. From a distance, they spotted an unidentifiable creature. They reported finding the murloc previously reported. They hadn't expected such luck. Now they could strike first. Data indicated the murloc possessed the equivalent strength of an E-rank hunter, but the clones could only access 53% of their full potential. However, factoring in the clones' abilities, they wouldn't be operating at their usual capacity, making a confrontation feasible. They received instructions: aim for the head. The goal was to take down the large creature swiftly. Even with headshots, the bullets inflicted no damage. Both clones were perplexed. Zhong, too, was baffled. Why hadn't the bullets worked? Now, they seemed to be having the opposite effect. They waited for another reaction. The murloc was leaping towards the clones, poised to attack. The clones dodged to either side. The murloc landed between them. They only saw the blur of the creature's jump. Even with their simultaneous attack, Zhong realized with a jolt of fear that they'd only managed to scratch. The monster attacked again, but it missed striking beside the clones. Zhong commended them, noting the difficulty of wielding a sword in the dense forest. The sword stuck fast in a tree. The murloc, with a surge of strength, swung its own weapon, cleaving through 2 trees at once. Forget what I just said, Zhong muttered, stunned, as the trees crashed to the ground. The murloc turned, searching for the clones. Seizing the distraction, they attacked. They struck its arm, but to no effect. Useless, John declared as the clones lunged at the monster. Ready to strike, the monster sensed their approach and prepared a punch. It connected with one clone, sending it flying. John wondered how they could possibly hope to kill it with such ineffective attacks. Then, something clicked. One bullet ricocheted off another, he said, causing some damage. He suggested they aim for the same spot. The clones fired, their bullets striking the same location. It worked. It's working, John exclaimed, exhilarated. He praised the clones, urging them to keep hitting it with bullets. The monster, clearly displeased, tried to attack. It tried again and again. Even as it was being shot, it braced itself, grabbing its sword. Suddenly, the sword burst into flames. Enraged, it prepared to attack, swinging the flaming sword at the clones. The clones managed to block in time, but it wasn't enough. One was sent flying. It's suddenly gotten stronger, Zhong observed. The murloc turned its attention to the other clone. Zhong tried to understand why the sword had ignited. He theorized that the monster, critically injured, had undergone a temporary evolution as a defense mechanism. The clone attacked the monster, but was swiftly struck by the flaming sword. The murloc attempted a final blow with its flaming sword, but the quick-thinking clone reacted swiftly. The clone grabbed the monster's arm, bracing for an attack. As a last resort, he aimed at the murloc, striking wherever he could, but the creature didn't appreciate the assault. The murloc prepared to strike back with its other hand. The clone defended, but not without taking damage. He disengaged from the murloc and lunged forward again. The monster, noticing this, advanced as well. The murloc aimed a kick at the clone, landing a solid blow. The clone crouched, trying to endure the pain. The murloc, relentless, prepared to strike again. But the other clone, previously knocked back, returned and intervened, saving his counterpart. Together, they lunged at the monster once more. The murloc, noticing their advance, prepared to attack, but they managed to land blows without being hit. Exhausted, the murloc glared at them furiously, but it could no longer stand. It collapsed, defeated. John declared it over. The clones lay on the ground, resting. Zhong said they were out of ammo and should call a day. He mentioned he should inform Agent Junimo, but as he turned, the clones spotted footprints. Alarmed, the clones tensed. Zhong declared the murloc wasn't dead and ordered clone number 2 to follow the tracks. The murloc was heading towards the portal at the hunting grounds entrance. A guard was preventing hunters from entering, explaining that a D-rank monster was loose inside. The guard assured everyone that hunters from the association would be dispatched soon and promised to provide updates as soon as he had any. Meanwhile, Jebwa, presumably John, thought Zhong should hurry. Suddenly, the guard yelled for everyone to gather their strength. He announced that the still-living monster was running towards the entrance, ready to attack anyone in its path. The guard tried to stop the murloc from reaching the portal, but to no avail. The monster reached the portal. Suddenly, clone number 1 emerged from the bushes and threw a dagger at the murloc, but the dagger simply bounced off. Then, a young man appeared, catching the dagger midair. Ready to unleash his full power, seeing the need to end the threat, he charged towards the murloc. He intended to eliminate the creature before it could harm anyone else. However, to everyone's surprise, the murloc displayed incredible agility in that desperate moment. Even one of his own kind was astonished. Someone announced their arrival on the scene. He stated he would report the details after investigating, though seeing the creature lying on the ground. He wasn't sure what to report. He approached to see what kind of creature it was and couldn't believe it was a murloc. One of the guards asked him if he was from the association. After confirming, the guard wanted to know what had happened. The guard reported that a hunter had been inside before the portal was locked down, hunting the D-rank monster. However, this was a D-rank realm, meaning there should have been a D-rank team there, but the guard reported it was a single hunter, not a D-rank hunter team. This shocked the man even more. He was also looking into it more deeply, and, as far as they knew, it was an E-rank hunter and his clones who took down the monster. This made him wonder how a hunter with E-rank clones could defeat a D-rank monster. He also realized that all the attacks were concentrated on one spot, possibly because they didn't have special weapons. He didn't know it was possible to shoot a moving monster with such precision. Just then, he glanced at the young man, John, who was talking to his agent, while the guard was still talking to him. He simply ordered him to complete the investigation. The D-rank monster lay dead on the ground, and he didn't know how to write the report. If he claimed to have killed a D-rank monster alone, how would he explain it to the association? They probably wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, his skills and other attributes were constantly increasing, and John was pleased to have unlocked several abilities at once. But he figured clones 1 and 2 survived because of regeneration. The agent asked how the clones were doing, because despite being injured, they still had some recovery time. He was now being praised by his agent for being a hunter and successfully taking down a D-rank monster. He said he wasn't joking. He truly believed he could hunt a D-rank monster alone without any problems. Just then, he remembered the dagger. The monster's was a unique sword. He mentioned that the monster had changed after its eyes turned red. It became something else entirely. However, the agent thought it was unsafe to let him have the sword first, as it might be a cursed item. John wasn't too happy about this, because if it was cursed, he couldn't use it. What made him feel a little better was that the agent said that because it was a cursed item, it might be worth a lot of money. Given this, he concluded it would be best to let the clones handle it first. Then he remembered he had another item and asked if the thing that fell from the Murloc's head was also rare. He showed something that looked a lot like a red stone. Mr. Junimo, upon seeing it, realized it was a low-grade gem, a worthless item. However, he found it difficult to tell the truth, and even seeing the hopeful look in a young man's eyes, he could only say that the item was cheap. This caused some disappointment, as John had expected to get a lot of money from the item. To cheer him up, Junimo said the other items might be worth a lot, so he shouldn't be too disheartened. This made him feel a little better, and he let his agent handle the rest of the collection work. Back home, he was tired. A lot had happened that day. But first, he wanted to summon clone number 3 again. He focused his mind to make it happen. He summoned clone number 3 again, handed him the equipment, and told him to practice. After he took off his clothes, stained with the grime of the hunt, now calmed down, and took a shower, he could take a look at the sword. Looking at the sword in the box, he realized it was a very beautiful dagger. He felt proud, as it was an item he had acquired himself. As he examined the stone, John realized it was a power gem. His research revealed it to be a low-grade crystal imbued with a strength attribute, but it carried a complicated side effect, the potential to eventually transform him into a monster. Normally, the injuries and other issues his clones suffered wouldn't affect him, but he was wary. This gem could transform him, not just a clone, into a monster. He even imagined his agent's reaction to such a transformation. People might not recognize him, he thought, and hunt him like prey. So he decided to leave the artifact and use for the time being. Next to inspect was the sword. He remembered Mr. Junemo's warning against touching it directly. That was why it had been placed in a box as a precaution, so retrieving it shouldn't be a problem. He instructed clone number 2 to retrieve the sword from a box. He noticed that as number 2 lifted it, he looked a little strange. This startled John briefly. Number 2 said he could hear voices emanating from a sword. Since John couldn't hear anything, he decided to activate his familiar ability. As he did, a disturbing cacophony arose, speaking of several different things at once. He quickly deactivated familiar. Apparently, aside from being incredibly loud, the noise didn't seem to affect the clones. John decided against using the sword for now. 2 status windows indicated their regenerative abilities were strengthening. Looking at number 1 and number 2, he realized that rest was helping them recover. He still had to take them hunting the next day, however, and they were still in rough shape. He told the 2 that for now, all 3 of them would meditate and unlock mana breathing. After activating the meditation function, he remembered he had university the following day. He was surprised to realize the semester had seemingly flown by. He'd been so preoccupied with improving his attributes that he hadn't noticed the passage of time. He was back in class, back at university. He hadn't realized how isolating it would be, with no one even pretending to know him. As he entered the classroom, he noticed at least one familiar face. It was the guy who had gone to the gym with him a few days prior. The guy said he joined because he heard a professor there was generous with grades. He asked John if he was still working his regular job. Gradually, people began to realize he was Yang Shangyuan. He had changed so much he was almost unrecognizable. Friends commented on how popular he was with the girls now. Even John himself was surprised. He hadn't realized how drastically he'd changed. The guy next to him, thinking he was joking, asked if he'd even seen his parents yet. He was planning on going home for a while when his friend invited him out for drinks later. He declined, as he already had plans. His friend thought he was being a flake. However, John had simply made a prior commitment and couldn't go out with him. Now convinced John was blowing him off, his friend assumed he was just making excuses to go out with a girl. He told his other friends about it, saying there was no need to lie anymore, because they had also heard of the World Hunters Association in various rooms. In an office bustling with researchers, a staff member reported to his superior that the Oracle had foretold a catastrophe. His superior, Mr. Michael Harris, the chairman of the association, inquired about the nature of this impending disaster. The staff member stated frankly that it concerned the formation of a portal and the incursion of hundreds of monsters. Mr. Harris asked if the location and date of the incursion had been confirmed. The staff member explained that the only confirmed detail was that the strongest monster would be a rank. It was predicted that this event would occur within the next few days, likely in South Korea. Several guild leaders gathered in a room, most of them puzzled as to the reason for such a large-scale meeting. One guild leader arrived, searching for Mr. Onit. She arrived, bumping right into him. Mr. Onit, momentarily winded, still managed a greeting to Ms. Miho. She was the guild leader of the Yellow Guild, Han Miho, and she commented that something big must be happening. Mr. Park Wangtae, the leader of the Guinness Guild, shared Ms. Miho's sentiment. They chatted briefly on their way to the conference room. Inside the conference room were numerous other guild leaders. One of them looked at Mr. Wangtae with disdain. It was Mr. Shin Haesong, the leader of the Haesong Guild, the top-ranked guild in South Korea. Ms. Miho and Mr. Wangtae felt apprehensive at the sight of him. Mr. Shin, brimming with arrogance, continually provoked Mr. Wangtae. Mr. Wangtae tried to ignore his comments, wanting only to end the conversation. Unexpectedly, Mr. Shin brought up the Guinness Guild's most sensitive topic, the Tower of Odin. He sneered, mentioning that he'd heard the Guinness Guild's first team had recently been dispatched there. He went on, saying he hadn't heard any news in the past few days and, in a deeply sarcastic tone, expressed his curiosity about. Mr. Kim Il-gum, the leader of Korea's second-ranked guild, tried to silence Mr. Shin and his taunts, but Mr. Shin, unfazed, continued, adding that he hadn't heard anything interesting aside from the less-than-stellar results. Mr. Wangtae had clearly taken the bait, and the tension in the room was palpable. It seemed Mr. Wangtae was about to lose his composure. Just then, the door opened, and Mr. Oh Byung-gan, the president of the Korean Hunters Association, entered. Noticing the strange atmosphere, he asked what was going on. Mr. Wangtae, still visibly irritated, calmed himself and returned to his seat. The other guild leaders also settled down. The association president looked puzzled. He began the meeting, thanking the guild leaders for their attendance. He then announced that Korea had recently received a disaster alert from the World Hunters Association. Mr. Shin wondered aloud if this was about the Oracle. The association president confirmed, stating that the information they received indicated a portal would open and a large wave of monsters would invade. Due to the potential for A-rank monsters, the cooperation of all guilds was required. The guild leaders questioned when and where this would occur. They wanted assurances that the entire country would be protected while they awaited the portal's appearance. The reason they were holding a meeting there to discuss this matter was because the only thing they knew was that it would happen, and they were worried, as there weren't enough hunters to handle the job. However, this was also being considered, and Leader Park Wangtae had a proposal. They decided to hear what he had to say, and he stated that when the disaster struck, all guilds would gather there and concentrate their manpower. This would be without exception, and guilds that didn't cooperate would be severely punished. Those who had called the meeting considered this a reasonable opinion and asked for a show of hands from those who agreed. One by one, they raised their hands in agreement with the decision. Oh Byung-gan, the hunter, declared the meeting over, and they would follow the opinion led by Park Wangtae. Elsewhere, the young hunter John Yangsheng was pleased, having finished his first day back at university. Before him, he quickly spotted the girl who was a student and another guy talking to her. The scene suggested the guy was really persistent in trying to get her phone number. However, she said she had a boyfriend, but even so, he persisted. John approached and asked what she was doing, calling her honey. She asked if he had been there long. He immediately felt her reaction was strange, as she didn't usually like being called that. She took his arm and said she'd been waiting and now they could leave. On the way, he asked if the guy had been pressuring her for her number, which was why she left so quickly. She explained that she had been telling him she had a boyfriend right up until he arrived, but that, in any case, she didn't have a boyfriend. She mentioned it was their school's anniversary and said she noticed he couldn't take his eyes off her casual clothes. Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it and saw a message saying all fees had been deducted and the balance deposited. He was satisfied, having earned 50 million. His clones were the best. Feeling incredibly pleased, he invited the girl to go eat some expensive meat. They went somewhere for beef, as they wanted something like Korean beef. She found everything incredibly delicious. She knew it was all very expensive and asked if he was sure. He told her to eat up, as he was just apologizing. Just then, she looked at his wrist. John, feeling flush, ordered more meat, this time enough for 4 people. At that moment, everyone's emergency alerts went off. They all checked their phones. For more information, the television was also on, announcing that this was not a drill, but an emergency disaster alert. From that moment on, a nationwide disaster alert was issued. Everyone in the restaurant was incredibly worried. Citizens across the country were told to check the locations of evacuation facilities. John thought it was unfair that they were out with friends while the traders were on dates with women. One of his friends wasn't sure if he was actually on a date. However, shortly after, he saw the two happily eating Korean beef in the distance. They could see the pair talking. After that scene, the friends were all in high spirits, and the one who had tried to defend John felt betrayed. Just then his phone rang. Not just his, but everyone's phone in the area began to buzz and chime. Even so, the friend who felt betrayed didn't check the message on his phone. John, however, realized that these ominous notifications meant something was happening on a national scale. He noticed the internet was practically exploding, yet the university hadn't announced any closures for the following day. John then noticed his friend approaching. He wondered what they were doing there. The friend who felt betrayed wanted to know who the girl with John was. John explained that it wasn't like that. She was just one of his students. After the brief explanation, he introduced his friends to the student, Miho. John asked for the rest of their food to be packed up as they hadn't finished it. He gave the takeaway container to Miho, telling her to share it with her parents. He also told his friends to go straight home and nowhere else. He then asked if there was anything else planned for the day. Miho's companions remarked that her parents would likely be worried if she was wandering around during a disaster alert. All of John's friends thought he was acting like a grumpy old man, always, nagging everyone, which frustrated him even more. He raised his voice, telling them all to go home and not worry their parents. The situation made him uneasy. His friends weren't taking the warning seriously. He looked around, noticing everyone going about their lives as if nothing was wrong. Everyone was content, laughing, and happy. It seemed like they would just move to another location and continue having fun. Perhaps he was overreacting, being overly sensitive. Everyone else seemed to be acting normally. He picked up his phone, checking on a few things and making a call. He called his manager, Junimo, asking if he knew about the disaster alert. He asked if there was any way to get more specific information about the impending disaster. Junimo only knew that they were expecting it to last for 3 months, as they didn't know when or where the portal would open. This news angered John. If it was so dangerous, couldn't the association provide more information and strongly advise people to be more cautious? However, Junimo explained that the real problem was the 3-month duration. It would have a massive economic impact. The lack of information was a way for them to say they had warned people without having to shoulder the economic burden. At that moment, Junimo was heading to the shelter. The hunting grounds were supposed to be locked down. He arrived at the place where the clones were. He was concerned about clone number 1 and clone number 2. The two were feeling a bit better. His expression turned somber when he saw that his clones hadn't fully recovered. Looking at their condition, he realized he couldn't summon clone number 3 at the moment. Given the circumstances, he decided to recall clone number 1 after the press release. Clone number 1 returned. He was told to wear a hat so he wouldn't be confused with the other clones. After a while, the 4 of them were together again. He told them to go home. Returning to his mother's house with the food, she stood at the door, unable to recognize the young man before her. He realized that after losing so much weight, even his own mother didn't recognize him. His mother wasn't sure if it was really Shang Yuan. A wave of awkwardness washed over him. "It's me, Mom," he confirmed. His mother was shocked. He'd lost so much weight, she thought he was starving. His father didn't seem to recognize him either. His younger sister quickly came to the door, curious to see if he'd really changed that much. She was annoyed. "You're supposed to come see your adorable little sister the moment you get home," she scolded. "Why are you just standing there?" Then she took a good look at him. The same shock that had registered on her parents' faces now mirrored on hers. At that moment, he remembered his friend's words. When he got home, even his family wouldn't recognize him. His mother was worried, eyeing the masks his friends wore. "They're not my friends," he explained. "Take off your masks," he instructed. His mother, father, and sister gasped. They all looked exactly like him. After some explaining, they realized the masked figures were clones created by his ability. His mother had heard that most young people cultivated abilities, but she hadn't known he did too. "I'm a hunter, Mom," he revealed. His mother didn't like that one bit. It was dangerous. With your abilities, there's no reason to put yourself in harm's way, she fretted. She mentioned the disaster warnings and the need to go to a shelter. His father said he was packing, just in case, but urged everyone to keep an eye on the situation. I have work tomorrow, his father added. We can't just up and leave. Shang Yuan watched them, realizing they didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. He felt he had to at least warn them about the monster invasion. I'll be staying here for a day at least, he announced. Classes are canceled. He knew that wouldn't convince them to leave, but he felt he should stay, at least for a while. Let's eat, he said. His sister peered at the package he held. Korean beef, she exclaimed, incredulous. Looking at his parents, a pang of guilt hit him. He should have visited sooner. The clones should eat too, he added. He decided Korean beef was too good for them, though. He gave them rice. The 3 clones huddled around a large bowl. Once the table was set, he announced, everyone must be hungry. Let's eat. His sister noticed the extra diners. What if you gain all that weight back? She teased. His mother beamed. It had been a long time since they'd all eaten together. Surrounded by his family, he paused, taking in the sight of his parents and sister. The domestic bliss didn't last. Before he knew it, he was on the floor, bruised and disoriented. He struggled to his feet, tried to regain his senses, to understand what had happened. Looking around, he was bewildered by the devastation. His parents' house, the entire neighborhood, had been struck by something. He looked up. The sky roiled with otherworldly creatures. A-rank and B-rank monsters, the size of buildings, poured from a gaping portal in the sky. The creatures were tearing through the city with a force that the few hunters present could barely contain. This city won't last much longer, John thought, stunned by the devastation surrounding him. He turned, calling out for his family, but they lay sprawled on the ground, buried beneath rubble. His eyes fell upon a piece of equipment lying nearby. He realized number 1 had shielded them from the blast with his own body. John's gaze shifted, catching a flicker of movement. His clones. They had also withstood the explosion, but not without damage. Number 1 was gone. Number 3 was injured. The thought churned in John's mind as he noticed his mother stirring. Mom, he cried. She turned, her voice filled with concern. Are you hurt? I'm all right, John reassured her. His father stood in shock, lamenting the destruction of their home. The house doesn't matter right now, John said urgently. The portals opened. Through the gaping maw of the newly formed portal, monstrous figures poured into the ravaged city, hunting and seizing humans. Some were simply buried under the debris. Others weren't so lucky, snatched away by the monstrous creatures. The portal continued to spawn its horrific offspring, a seemingly endless tide of destruction. They crammed what supplies they could into their backpacks. Did you get your suit on? John asked his younger sister. Yeah, she replied, but it's a little big. That's because number 1 wore it, John explained. Are the clones okay? She asked, her voice small. They're fine, he said, trying to sound reassuring. Suddenly, something hurtled from the sky, striking the ground near the house with a small explosion. It was a monster fallen from the sky. John initially thought it had simply fallen, but as another plummeted to earth, he realized the portals were opening in the sky, raining down flightless monsters. We're lucky in that regard, he muttered. They tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The door stuck. His sister cried, her voice laced with panic. Help! It must be jammed, his father said, frozen in place. John grabbed a baseball bat from his father's hand. Wait here, he instructed. He braced himself, activating his striking ability. Focusing his power, he slammed the bat against the door with tremendous force. The lock splintered under the onslaught. With a final kick, John sent the door flying open. Go, he urged, ushering them through the doorway. The sight that greeted him was unforgettable, terrifying. Monsters swarmed over cars and buildings. How far to the nearest shelter? He asked his father. 2 kilometers, his father replied, his voice strained. Slimes oozed across the road. Skeletons, shattered from their fall, began to reassemble. Stone golems pieced themselves back together. A lot of them weren't affected by the fall, John muttered to himself. I don't know if we can make it. The underground tunnels. His sister exclaimed. We have underground tunnels. John asked, momentarily stunned. Snapping back to reality, he said, everyone that way. He stopped short, hearing a cry for help. A man lay trapped beneath a pile of rubble. Is anyone there? Help! Bricks pinned him down, along with the unconscious form of a monster. But the monster was stirring, pushing itself upright with a groan, using the debris for support. The trapped man's eyes widened in terror as he saw the creature awaken. Screams of terror pierced the air. It was a downgraded troll. Witnessing the horrific scene, the trapped man cried out again for help. Shang Yuan's father worried about what his son might do, already contemplating how to stop him. He said Shang Yuan needed to think rationally. In their current situation, they couldn't save everyone. He urged them towards the tunnels. Shang Yuan judged that clone number 3 wasn't in any condition to fight, and number 2 alone wouldn't be enough. The trapped man's cries continued, desperate for someone to hear him. Shang Yuan thought, he's not a clone, and if he's defeated, that's it. It's over. He couldn't just leave without at least trying to help. His family questioned what he was doing. A choked cry of mother escaped the trapped man's lips. I have to at least try, Shang Yuan told them. When you get there, lock the door and wait for me. He directed clone number 2 to follow him and told number 3 to protect his family to the very end. His younger sister asked if he was crazy. His father questioned, are you really going? Shang Yuan replied, I'm a hunter. I have to. He and number 2 headed out to help the trapped man. His sister's cries had come back, echoed behind him. He thought of the monsters rampaging through the city. There was only one thing hunters had to do, and they had to do it without hesitation. Shang Yuan attacked the troll. The attack seemed to impact the creature. He wanted to prove himself as a hunter, shielding the man from the monstrous threat. Shang Yuan ordered clone number 2 to get the man to safety, reiterating, I'm a hunter. This is my duty. Number 2 began clearing the debris, pinning the man down, finally pulling him free. Shang Yuan asked the man if he could walk, receiving an affirmative response. The troll, enraged by Shang Yuan's actions, roared furiously. Shang Yuan was annoyed at having to deal with such a large monster. He ordered number 2 to pick up a weapon, prepared to use everything at his disposal. Shang Yuan knew this wasn't the time to be picky. He handed a crystal to number 2, telling him to eat it without hesitation. The clone consumed the crystal, and the effects began to manifest rapidly. The crystal-induced transformation began. He trembled slightly during the process, finally completing his monstrous transformation. Shang Yuan confirmed with the clone, are you still my partner? The clone affirmed his complete loyalty. The troll seemed confused by the situation. Number 2's transformation boosted Shang Yuan's attributes without any side effects. He and his clone faced the troll, ready to continue the fight. The troll advanced with its massive club, causing the ground to shudder violently, then launched a direct attack. Shang Yuan successfully dodged the attack, defending himself well even against that crude club. The monster tried to grab him, but the clone stepped in, striking the troll's arm. Transformed and wielding the sword, the clone was significantly stronger. Shang Yuan couldn't help but marvel at the incredible weapon. The troll roared in pain, further enraged by the heavy blow. It began to attack repeatedly with increased ferocity. Even with the troll's speed, Shang Yuan dodged the attacks with ease. It was slower than the fishmen he'd defeated in the dungeon, and he lunged at the troll with all his might. But the hulking monster managed to shield itself, ending up with only a minor injury to its hand. John couldn't understand how the troll's arm, so badly damaged by the clone, had already regenerated. He landed a blow, but the troll parried just in time, sending John's body flying backward. Still amazed by the troll's regenerative abilities, John noted that its flesh wasn't particularly tough, making the monster vulnerable to his sword. But its regeneration made up for this weakness. John realized he could barely inflict any lasting damage. At that moment, he called out to number 2, asking the clone to knock the troll down for a moment so he could press the attack. All he needed was to bring the monster before him to its knees. To achieve this, he aimed for its legs, hoping for greater success. The attack landed, and he succeeded in making the troll feel the impact. Even with its regenerative abilities, he was sure the attack had, at least, partially impaired its vision. Another attack was launched against the creature. Its legs were damaged, and this enraged the monster further. The troll roared, its powerful regeneration unable to completely negate the pain. It glared at John. John prepared to use a skill attack, leaning back and gathering his strength for the blow. Unleashing the attack on the troll with all his might, John sent the monster hurtling away. Having successfully knocked down the troll, his stats increased. His hand throbbed. It was a side effect of that particular attack skill. John reflected on how the troll, even without relying on good weaponry, was as formidable as the fishmen. He He decided to go after his younger sister to protect her. He wanted to call her, but he'd lost his phone during the fight, so he asked number 2 for his. The clone handed it over immediately. John commented that number 2, with his deformed appearance, might be turned away from the shelter. They heard a strange noise, a horde of monsters chasing some surviving citizens. John frowned. The city had been overrun, devastated. Planes flew over the ruined city, observing the apocalyptic scene from the air. Gigantic monsters, like enormous dragon-like creatures, trampled houses and buildings. One was about to unleash further destruction with a powerful fire beam when it was intercepted by magic that struck it. A fire mage had launched the attack. They were members of the Red Flame Guild, ranked 9th in Korea, but they weren't alone. Members of the Scorpion Guild, ranked 7th in Korea, had also arrived. The dragon-like monster let out a mighty roar, and the hunters charged towards the enraged creature. Multiple attacks were occurring throughout the city, and planes carrying hunters circled in the air. They reached their destination and prepared to open the hatch. The hatch opened. The hunters prepared to jump. Members of the Park 1, Park 2, and Guinness guilds were ready for action. A flying monster was approaching the plane, but the defensive weaponry was activated. Many guilds are focusing their efforts on eliminating the invading monsters. Joining them would be a waste of time, he said. They should prioritize evacuating the survivors below the aircraft. Monsters of varying strengths are visible throughout the city. Some hunters are prioritizing looting, even robbing those who are unconscious. From above, the commander is furious at the hunters exploiting the situation. The pilot informs him that a number of survivors have been spotted 700 meters out and directs him to take a look. The commander acknowledges, activating the power within his eyes. With this enhanced vision, he spots a group in the distance. It's John and his clones, protecting a family. The commander recognizes him as a hunter and notes he's holding his own, but the sheer number of enemies is too much for 2, even with the clones. He informs the pilot he's heading north, equipping himself and ordering his team to assemble and commence the rescue. He leaps from the aircraft, activating his flight gear. He soars across the ravaged cityscape with his gear, heading towards his target, John. John fights on, thinking that he just needs to eliminate the troll and then head for the tunnels. More and more monsters converge on John's position. The family he's protecting cowers in terror. John tells them to head for the building's basement, but a family member cries out that there are monsters behind them now. Knowing this, he orders number 2 to cover the rear while he tries to handle the front alone. A monster lunges at one of the family members, but number 2 manages to strike it down first. John battles his own monsters with his weapon, thinking that due to energy depletion, he can no longer use his strikeability ability. Suddenly, some debris begins to shift, and a massive bird-like monster emerges from within. John dodges the bird's attack, cursing the monster's relentless return. The bird unleashes a strange, glowing attack. The energy intensifies, spreading like molten lava. It nearly hits John, but he defends himself. Some of the attack is about to land on the defenseless family, but number 2 throws himself in front of them, shielding them. He takes the full brunt of the attack, sustaining critical injuries. Unable to stand, leaning heavily on his staff, suddenly, a massive claw appears above the bird monster. It crushes the bird monster. It's an enormous tiger-like monster. Seeing the monstrous tiger, John despairs. The weaker monsters flee in terror from the tiger. Number 2 damage disappears. The tiger prepares to attack John, who sits stunned, watching number 2 vanish, paralyzed by helplessness. He simply waits, bracing for the inevitable. Suddenly, a slash cuts through the air. John, still cowering, waiting for the attack, opens one eye to see what happened. He sees a hunter he doesn't recognize standing before the tiger. The slash from before has impacted the tiger, cleaving it in 2. The onlookers are stunned by the hunter's power. The hunter removes his mask and asks John if he's all right. Stunned, John asked the man who he was. He replied that he was Park Mantique of the Guinness Association. From the crowd huddled in the building's basement, a voice cried out, demanding to be let out. The others seemed accustomed to the outbursts. It was Jiu, urging number 3 to release her so she could go and save her brother. She looked at him, questioning his impassivity. Why wasn't he more driven to help? Wasn't a clone supposed to want to save its original? He stated that his master's orders were his priority. Her parents tried to calm her, saying the others were getting frightened. She challenged her father, asking if he wasn't worried. He admitted his fear, but insisted John would return. He explained that the clones were a manifestation of John's power. If they were still active, then John must also be alive. He reminded her of how John had broken down the door, proof of his hunter abilities, and urged her to have faith in her brother. Jiyu, though heartbroken, understood. As she voiced her renewed trust in John, number 3 released his grip on her. Suddenly, a loud banging echoed from the door. Someone was pleading for help. Her father confirmed someone was outside. Jiyu hoped it was Gang, but her father said the voice was different. The others speculated that the person was from another apartment, locked out and unsure of the entry code. They debated whether to open the door. Checking the security camera, they saw a man outside. Jiyu's mother suggested it might be the man John had saved earlier. Jiyu decided to open the door. As she did, she thought she saw other figures with him. It had to be John. The door slowly creaked open, and a voice called out joyfully, shouting Gang's name. Then they saw it. The man was being held aloft by a monstrous creature. A cry of terror came from behind the man. Jiyu froze, paralyzed with fear. The monster's claws tightened around the man before flinging him away like a rag doll. It peered into the shelter, a chilling laugh rumbling from its throat. It was a B-rank monster. The screaming fireflies darted around, their erratic movements highlighting something even more terrifying. As the realization dawned that a massive monster stood in the doorway, panic erupted. Everyone scrambled to escape. Number 3 positioned himself in front of Jiyu, shielding her. The sight of the enormous creature and the clone's protective stance sent a wave of terror through her, leaving her paralyzed. He braced for the impact. The impact, however, was too powerful to deflect completely. A tense silence hung in the air between number 3 and the giant insect-like monster. Still in the throes of deep inertia, number 3 didn't immediately register the piercing pain in his abdomen. Jiyu's parents reacted instantly, their cries snapping her out of her stupor. Thanks to number 3's quick action, she was spared the full force of the attack and turned to her parents. He had stood against the immediate danger and managed to save her. The situation demanded an immediate response. He fired at the electronic lock on the door. The system, detecting the damage, initiated the emergency lockdown. Just then, the monster attempted to force its way inside. However, number 3 lunged forward, grappling with the creature and propelling them both back outside. The monster fought back, but the clone, using his enhanced strength, shoved it away, though he was thrown out with it. Elsewhere, Hunter Park Mantique arrived just in time to save John. He was certain this man was the one behind the organization's Awakening Project. He introduced himself to the hunter as Jong Sang-won, expressing his gratitude for saving his life. However, the hunter was more impressed by the fact that Jong had saved so many lives, calling him remarkable. He commended John's bravery for not running away, remarking that even if he had wanted to, with so many people present, escape would have been impossible. Hunter Park mused that it's easy for one's will to crumble in dangerous situations, so this truly was an act of courage. Jong thought bashfully, "I really did well." Park looked at the boy, searching for more answers. He recalled that while he was flying, he had sensed the presence of a strange creature. Battling that entity hadn't been easy, especially with lives needing to be saved. Hunter Park didn't know what it was. It simply dissipated into thin air, leaving behind only its clothes. Before vanishing, it had been fighting a beast many times its size, something that would be classified as a new type of monster. In that moment, he wondered what the being that transformed into magic actually was. He turned to ask the boy, who was now getting to his feet, if he was a hunter. The boy replied that he was, though not for very long. Park wondered if he could ask a question about his abilities. Looking at the hunter who had saved his life, John felt no need to hide such a thing. He was about to explain his abilities when he realized his connection to number 3 had been severed. He snapped into a different state, grabbing his sword and rushing out. He yelled only that he had to leave. His family was in grave danger. Hunter Park shouted after him, warning him not to go alone, as it was too dangerous. His advice seemingly heard, John called for reinforcements, requesting they track his location and get the survivors back. After that, he waited for Bravo Team to pick him up. John rushed home, knowing the portal hadn't fully closed. Though worried about his family, he couldn't block out the voices emanating from his sword. He activated his sprint ability, gaining momentum to arrive before the worst could happen. Yet, somehow, the sword was changing his body and his behavior. Elsewhere, another hunter was utilizing a fireball skill. As he unleashed the skill, hitting its target, the area was engulfed in flames. All that power wasn't enough to burn away the presence in one particular spot, something that had been there for a long time. Someone called for the support teams to spread out, his attack range being too wide. The teams seemed inadequate against the sheer number of monsters constantly appearing. Furthermore, their hides were so thick that poison attacks had no effect. The entire situation was worse than the hunters had anticipated. New difficulties arose every moment, forcing them to confront monsters with vastly different abilities. A figure was spotted and quickly questioned. They wanted to know why Shin Hae-sun was there. He replied that he'd simply heard there was a lot of money to be made nearby. They never understood he was warning them about the supreme monster causing so much chaos. He needs to show his absolute power. When you possess such overwhelming strength, teamwork becomes unnecessary. Meanwhile, in Ji-Yu's home, her father is in a state of panic. Seeing her daughter injured, Ji-Yu's mother cries out and scrambles for bandages. Her father notices something approaching from outside, the very monster that wounded his daughter. It begins slamming against the door again, and the tension among those nearby becomes almost palpable. Ji-Yu, lying injured on the floor, pleads with everyone to hurry. The monster is closing in. Her parents are torn. They can't leave her, but the fear for her life is overwhelming. Just then, John, the young man with the ability to clone, arrives, a sword gripped in his hand. He's lost control. His eyes lock with the monster's. Ji-Yu's father notices something different about his son. The sword, the hard glint in his eyes. It's unsettling. The others are startled too, but John sees only his sister lying on the floor. He sees his parents hovering over her, their faces etched with fear. And he sees the monster that caused it all. The sight of his injured sister, her tears, the helplessness of his parents, it's too much. For a fleeting moment, rage consumes him. He's overtaken by the sword's aura, a palpable thirst for violence. The monster senses his intent. They attack simultaneously, a clash of fury. Both are wounded, but John's anger is so intense, he barely registers the pain. The monster speaks, using Ji-Yu's voice. John, still gripping the sword, tenses. The pain from the monster's attack begins to register, a burning throb, but the sword's pull is stronger. They lunge at each other again. Just as the monster's attack is about to connect, someone leaps in front of John, pulling him back. It's Hunter Park. Another female hunter arrives at the same moment. The hunter's presence forces the monster back slightly, shielding the family. The woman who saved John is satisfied with her quick thinking. Hunter Park meets the monster's next attack head-on. The blow so powerful, it sends the creature flying. The female hunter checks John's wounds. He's still under the sword's influence, lost in a berserker rage. Recognizing his state, she activates her mental transference ability, urging him to rest. It's a desperate attempt to break through the illusion gripping him. Despite her efforts, there's no positive response. When asked about his condition, she grimly states it would be best to eliminate the monster quickly. Even in his frenzied state, John tries to speak. She silences him, warning that any further exertion could reopen his wounds. Even through his pain, he managed to choke out that his sister was hurt, clutching his chest as if the emotional agony were far worse than the physical. With the last of his strength, he pleaded with them to save her. Hearing this, Hunter Park felt a surge of resolve. Looking at the monster, he declared that neither he nor the young man's sister would die that day. At that moment, the monster seemed to register that the hunter's energy, his magic, was intensifying. Hunter Park reiterated his promise, assuring the injured hunter that neither of them would die. He told the younger man to rest, because it would all be over soon. Obyang-han, meanwhile, realized the urgent need for evacuation. The situation was spiraling out of control. He was in the midst of organizing the meeting documents when he received a call summoning him. The guild leader of the top-ranked guild needed to speak with him, and Obyang-han bristled at the perceived arrogance and lack of courtesy. Despite his annoyance, the guild leader told the broad-shouldered man on the other end of the line to stay out of it, as this was a matter of great importance. The man urged him to remain calm, assuring him the problem would be resolved swiftly. Shin Hae-sun asked if he intended to evacuate the populace immediately, to which he received an affirmative response. He then questioned whether he planned to tell them everything, prompting the other man to inquire about his intentions. Obyang-han explained his reasoning, stating that under the circumstances, he would announce an impending invasion by an A-rank monster. He also wanted to know if the man could handle what was coming. He pointed out that everyone would flock to the association, and he wasn't sure the man would still have his head next month, let alone in 3 months' time. Shin Hae-sun, seeing this as detrimental to his business, asked what he wanted him to do. The man instructed him to downplay the scale of the invasion, omitting any mention of A-rank monster involvement. In other words, he wanted them to shoulder the blame for not evacuating. He added that if he were in Shin Hae-sun's position, he wouldn't hold a meeting or make any announcements about it. Oh Byung-han was furious, aghast at the potential loss of life. Shin Hae-sun, however, pointed out that it was actually a good thing. In his view, the more people injured, the greater the need for hunters to intervene. The guild leader of the top-ranked guild placed a hand on the other man's shoulder, telling him he misunderstood. This wasn't a request. The man closed his eyes, his fists clenching in anguish. At that very moment, members of the giant dragon guild were engaging the monsters. It was still a time of peace, and the clones served as training. They just needed the clones to work hard, gradually increasing their strength. He was convinced this was the best use of their abilities, earning him money and providing exercise. He had just received a call from Mr. Junmo, and he was pleased. Since the young hunters had arrived, he also wanted the clones to go to the horned rabbit hunting grounds that day. Mr. Hayamo wondered where number 2 was going. He questioned why the young man wasn't training with them, as it would make him stronger, faster. However, Hunter Park thought it better to leave the hard work to the clones, explaining that his declaration of becoming a hunter hadn't been entirely serious. He made enough money just hunting horned rabbits. Taking care of himself was enough. Just then, the man questioned if that was the reason everything had turned out this way. Suddenly, he was startled by something. As he looked at the agent before him, the man seemed no longer the same person. He, too, began to be attacked by him. It was then he realized everyone around him had changed. They questioned him, asking if he had become a hunter and why he had ultimately left and abandoned everyone. His sister, too, was in a different state, pleading with him to save her. He looked around, trying to understand what it all meant. Just like that, he abruptly awoke in an unexpected place. John opened his eyes to the sterile white of a hospital bed. Mr. Wandi was there, asking if he'd had a nightmare. He told John not to move too much, lest his wounds reopen. Too sore to speak, John could only grimace. Mr. Wandi cautioned him to be careful. His condition had been dire, and he was lucky it hadn't been worse. Jong Sang-won thanked Mr. Wandi for saving him, but Mr. Wandi simply said they needed to talk another day. It wasn't the right time, he added. Jong Sang-won's parents entered the room, much to his surprise. Their faces etched with worry, they rushed to his side. Jong Sang-won's attending physician spoke up, explaining that, first and foremost, the surgery had been a success. He estimated that after a month of recovery, Jong Sang-won would be able to return to his normal life. Disoriented, the protagonist asked what had happened to the portal and how many days had passed since the monster invasion. His mother informed him that 4 days had passed. The major guilds had dealt with most of the powerful monsters, but some lower-level ones remained. Jong Sang-won confessed he couldn't remember anything before losing consciousness. Then, a chilling realization washed over him. He hadn't seen his sister. A note of desperation crept into his voice as he called out her name. He persisted, demanding to know where she was. Why wouldn't anyone answer him? Gesturing towards the room where Jiu lay, the doctor explained that they had treated the wound on her abdomen, but she had been infected by a virus that absorbed human magic power. He went on to explain that most ordinary people were infected by monsters that came through the portal, monsters that broke down the magic power of those infected. The virus was usually harmless, he continued, but everyone's magic power had different properties, and when this happened, the infected couldn't live a normal life. A wave of dread washed over Jong Sang-won. Was there a cure? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The doctor shook his head. There wasn't, he explained, because the infected person's magic power synchronized with the virus. Neither medicine nor healing magic was sufficient. There was only a very slim chance, he said, if they could get the help of an S-rank healer or acquire an extremely rare medicine. Jong Sang-won already understood. Extremely rare meant prohibitively expensive. The doctor simply confirmed this with a regretful tone, not elaborating further. Jang Sang-won sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the news pressing down on him. A sudden pang of regret stabbed at him. Regret for helping others. The thought lingered, a dark stain on his conscience. He should have prioritized his family, he thought, instead of trying to help others. He remembered his sister's plea for him to go to the shelter with the family. The simple memory of his sister, Jiu, lying injured on the ground spurred his anger. He clenched his fists until his wounds split open again. The doctor told Jang Sang-won to stop. A flurry of thoughts raced through his mind. The monsters he hadn't been able to kill. Jang Sang-won's condition worsened as his wounds reopened. The doctor urged him to calm down. With his wounds all splitting open again, Jang Sang-won could only blame himself for not being powerful enough to save everyone. He wept in grief and frustration. He wished he had saved his entire family. He woke up in the afternoon, still feeling the sorrow, the coldness. Desolate, unresponsive, just quiet. Jang Sang-won looked to the side, noticing someone approaching. It was Sien, coming to see him. She walked in slowly, addressing him formally as Professor Zhang. He apologized for the sudden visit, but thanked her for being there. He asked how her family was. She replied, a little awkwardly, that the house was damaged, but everyone had made it safely to the shelter. Zhang asked how she knew where he was. She replied that her father had contacted his father. He asked her why she was being so formal with him. She attributed it to the gravity of the situation they were in. Jang Sang-won told her she could speak comfortably with him. She agreed and asked when he could teach her again. Silence hung in the room for a moment. He called her name, as if about to make a confession. Jang Sang-won said he wanted to talk to her honestly about something. He told her he was dropping out in 2 weeks. Still in the hospital. The doctor seemed incredulous. Jang Sang-won making a full recovery in just 2 weeks was extraordinary, even for a hunter. He was getting dressed to leave the hospital, putting on a casual clothes. The wound from an insect monster had left a large scar on his shoulder, a painful reminder. He recalled his conversation with Sien about Jiyu's condition and how he couldn't be her mentor anymore. The news had surprised the girl. Jang Sang-won said he was very sorry about it. Sien replied awkwardly that it was okay and thanked him for everything he had done for her. She turned to leave, clearly affected by the news, but brushed it off lightly, saying it wasn't like they would cut off contact. She said he'd regret giving up a pretty student like her, adding that she would be going to university. She paused for a moment. She also said she would get a boyfriend in university, finally telling him not to go back on his word when that happened. Back in the present, he didn't pay much attention to that. He thought about how bad things were. He figured he didn't have time for more regrets, even if he wanted them. Ready to go, he left the hospital. Jang Sang-won hailed a cab. He was going to see Mr. Won. The cab pulled up. Jang Sang-won stared at the place before him. The Guinness Guild office. He walked into the building. The receptionist greeted him and asked what he needed. Jang Sang-won stated he was there to see Mr. Winter, the guild leader. The receptionist inquired if he had an appointment. She began to dismiss him, but a man stopped her, telling her to wait. He asked Jang Sang-won if he was in fact Mr. Jang Sang-won. Jang Sang-won confirmed his identity. The man declared Jang Sang-won a guest and invited him upstairs. He informed Jang Sang-won that Captain Park Il-han was waiting for him outside. From beyond the room, a voice called out for Park Il-han. The voice announced Jang Sang-won's arrival. Park Il-han called for him to enter. Jang Sang-won stepped into the room, greeting Park Il-han. Winter expressed his pleasure at seeing Jang Sang-won recovered so quickly. Jang Sang-won attributed his swift recovery to Winter's help, mentioning he'd come to see him as soon as he was discharged. Winter brushed it off, saying he'd only done what was natural. Jang Sang-won insisted it was far from that. He pointed out that Winter had saved his family and rushed them to the hospital. Jang Sang-won expressed his deep gratitude, but admitted his curiosity as to why Winter had gone to such lengths for them. He'd heard that Winter had provided them with a private room at the hospital, even arranging accommodation for his parents and intensive care for his sister, Jiyu. Winter clenched his fists, steeling himself for what he was about to say. He confessed that he, too, had a sister who had disappeared with her team. He suggested that perhaps he saw something of himself in Jang Sang-won. He hadn't done it to make Jang Sang-won feel indebted or obligated. Jang Sang-won then asked why Winter had requested to see him so urgently upon his release. Il-han brought up the abilities Jang Sang-won hadn't been able to discuss before. He asked about the clones, confirming if they were real and capable of performing actual tasks. Jang Sang-won answered in the affirmative. Clenching his own fist, Il-han inwardly celebrated his correct guess. Getting straight to the point, Il-han declared that he needed Jang Sang-won's power to save the Guinness Guild's first squad. He emphasized that this wasn't a request for a favor in return for past aid, but a plea born of necessity. The only one who could save his sister and the other members of the first squad was Jang Sang-won. Lowering his head, Il-han admitted he was begging. Jang Sang-won considered what he'd heard, remembering Winter's promise to look after his sister. Since Winter had saved his family once, he would help. When asked if he accepted, he confirmed that he would do his best. Jang Sang-won asked what he needed to do to save them. They were in a training room. He questioned where they were. Winter explained that it was the Guinness Guild's training grounds. The area was incredibly durable, allowing Jang Sang-won to use his abilities without reservation. Winter explained that they needed to prepare for the rescue for 2 reasons. The first was time. His sister possessed an ability that allowed her to carry a large amount of resources, enough for up to 8 months. The second reason was the dungeon's rank. The team was classified as S-Rank and unable to return. He asked if Jang Sang-won understood the implications, to which Jang Sang-won replied that it would be too dangerous for them to continue. Winter agreed, but added that there was a way around this. He explained that humans exhibit unparalleled strength when near death. A momentary burst of power released in dire situations, enough to tear muscles and break bones. This, of course, was reflected in the data. He said that up until now, he'd relied on his battle instincts, but that wouldn't work for this mission. He needed stats. He said he felt bad for him, but it was the only way. He told him to stick with JM Corporation for as long as he could hold out. Jang Sang-won nervously chewed on his fingernails as he looked over his old messages with Chong Junimo. He continued biting his nails, staring at his phone until he heard approaching footsteps. Relief washed over him. He turned and called out to the injured Junimo. Junimo, shocked by Jang Sang-won's condition, confirmed it was really him. Junimo asked what happened. Jang Sang-won replied that a lot had happened, that he had a lot to say. He told Junimo everything. Junimo was stunned that Jang Sang-won's sister, Jiu, had been infected with the AM virus during the gate breach. He asked if Jang Sang-won was all right. He replied that he was fine, and that even within the same family, mana manifested differently. Junimo asked if he'd taken a mission from the Guinness Guild. Jang Sang-won confirmed he had. They'd save his family, so he was going to save theirs. Junimo said he was surprised he hadn't been able to reach him. Jang Sang-won explained that he'd lost his phone and was using his backup. Junimo asked if he'd backed up his contacts. Junimo reminded him about his friends and other important people, but Jang Sang-won said it was better this way. Junimo asked how he'd gotten injured. He explained it was from the guild mission he'd mentioned. He said he needed stats, so they'd been training. That's how he ended up like this. Jang Sang-won felt they'd gone too far and said he was going to complain to the guild. Jang Sang-won told him to relax, since he'd already agreed. His sister was trapped in a dungeon. He must have been desperate. Jang Sang-won said he knew the feeling. He said he'd just been beaten today, but he planned to use clones for the next training session. Junimo said he'd grab him some healing potions from the office. The next day, on the training grounds, Jang Sang-won thanked Junimo for training him. Junimo said he'd brought a clone. Jang Sang-won said today would be different from yesterday. Sometime later, he and his clone walked out, covered head to toe in bandages. The following day, he brought 2 clones, but all 3 emerged bandaged. The day after that, he went back to training, but this time he brought 3 clones. But they still lost. The 4 of them went to the general's office, and the general asked if they were okay. Jang Sang-won thought that even if the clones could learn the moves by watching, there was still a huge gap in their stats. He needed to find a way to bridge that gap. He figured clones meant bandages, potions, and rest. But after some hard thinking, he had an idea. He asked the general if it was possible. The general replied that it was. He said he could try to get it, but asked if it was safe. Jang Sang-won told him not to worry. On the training grounds, Junimo said he was glad to see him working hard, but he was stunned by the sight that greeted him. A transformed clone. Not just 1, but 3. An agent, looking pleased, arrived with a box, saying he'd retrieved it. Jang Sang-won checked to see if everything was as expected. Because the agent had worked so quickly, rushing to purchase everything, there wasn't much, but looking at the box, he realized it would be enough. The next day, after arriving, he trained with himself and his 3 clones, but things seemed a little different. Captain Park Il-han asked him what he had done with the clones. He then revealed a red gem, explaining that he had given them 60 gems each. He explained that the clones, being considered summoned beings, could absorb the gems. Captain Park, surprised, realized that the gems could indeed be used by the clones. However, the young hunter wanted to use up all the gems that day. He had the sword ready. Park Il-han noticed he was using some sort of stance or something. He told them to come at him with the intent to test it, while the clones surrounded the captain. Park Il-han immediately noticed the circulation in his chest and stepped back. He also noticed a significant improvement in his abilities, as he knew they were usually weaker. It must have been the effect of the gems, but the monsterization effect seemed stronger. Even so, he was stronger than all of them combined. He was doing this to make them stronger by absorbing the gems. But the biggest advantage of the clones was that it greatly reduced the young hunter's satiety, yet he didn't monsterize. At one point, he managed to catch Captain Park off guard and even fired a shot at him. The projectile didn't penetrate. However, the young hunter knew he couldn't hurt him, not even with a bullet. At that moment, Jong Sang-won struck him again, which seemed to be a signal, as all the clones followed his movements. But it wasn't strong enough. Park Il-han told him that just holding the sword and swinging it with brute force wasn't enough. He warned him that he should channel mana into his arm and the sword as if they were one. He commented that if he mastered that, he could cut through monsters even with a twig. Jong Sang-won realized that his wooden sword seemed stronger than a steel one. However, he wasn't willing to lose. Park Il-han told him that he had indeed become stronger and could further enhance his abilities by consuming gems, but even that wasn't enough. He spoke as he simultaneously attacked all four of them. He said he couldn't think he was just a warrior at that level. Jong Sang-won, taking the blow to the face, said that might be the case. However, the young hunter knew that soon it would be different. Even with his clones already on the ground, he remained standing, constantly trying to fight. Park Il-han, looking into his eyes, said he wasn't planning on stopping at rank S. He told the clones to look at where he was standing. Then the clones looked in that direction. At that moment, the original told them to pay attention to the captain's face. He asked them where else they had seen that angular nose and sharp features. He exclaimed that the captain was a gem. At that moment, the clones began to see him as a gem. Jong Sang-won told them that if they absorbed him, he would be the first to win. He urged his clones to bite into him. Then, turning to Captain Park Il-han, admitted that the captain's demands weren't the only reason he was driven to become stronger. Waking up in the hospital, a profound sense of helplessness had washed over him. Entrusting his family's lives to others during the catastrophe, he knew the search parties were already combing through the wreckage. They would find only the mangled remains of monsters, and elsewhere, a simmering hatred for the weak, shared by hunters who felt the same sting of powerlessness. No matter how they attacked the monsters, they remained unmoved, impervious to their efforts. It was the despair of striving without result that he vowed never to experience again. He wouldn't dwell on his current limitations. In that moment, he renewed his assault on the hunter. He had never intended to stop. 6 months had passed since then. At the Sinchidong Station hunting grounds, he intercepted a hunter, slamming him to the ground before kicking a young boy away. The boy's friends rushed to his defense, bewildered. They had official permits for the hunting grounds. They couldn't understand the aggression. The bullies occupying the hunting grounds claimed affiliation with the Silver Wing Guild. A few guards were present, but they feigned ignorance of the escalating commotion. The hunters realized the guards' indifference. One of the bullies, however, extended an invitation to the hunting grounds. Their leader, they insisted, was a genuinely amiable fellow. Said leader then barked at them to quiet down. They were scaring everyone. Jong Sang-won, arriving at the hunting grounds, sensed the disturbance. The guild leader overheard him speaking to a guard. The guard warned him away, citing an incident. The guild leader scoffed, questioning Sang-won's intelligence. He declared the hunting grounds were under Silver Wing Guild control, accusing Sang-won of deliberately provoking him. Sang-won retaliated instantly, leaving the leader momentarily stunned. The other hunters, locked out of the grounds, watched with a mixture of apprehension and fascination as the young hunter posed a question to the air. What should one do when someone tries to slap them? He mused that the guild's name sounded familiar. He might try to recall it later, though he doubted it mattered. He questioned the guild's claim to the hunting grounds. The other guild members bristled at his defiance. They couldn't believe he was picking a fight with their guild. He wouldn't get away with this, they threatened. They were all D-rank hunters, they reminded him. Did he really think he could take them all on alone? Sangwon, with a touch of irony, asked if he was, in fact, alone. As if on cue, his clones materialized. Only then did the bullies realize they were the ones in trouble. They stammered, demanding to know who these interlopers were. Sangwon, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, asked if they would care to repeat their earlier statement about him being alone. In the director's office, Mr. Park paid a visit one day. Mr. Park apologized for the late-night intrusion, but the director assured him it was no trouble, as he'd been meaning to see him anyway. He opened a drawer, retrieved a file, and as he handed it to the hunter, explained that due to the personal nature of the information, no photographs were allowed and it had to be returned immediately. After reviewing the file, he remarked on how much the young man's stats had increased in just 6 months. His manager had reported that he seemed like a completely different person lately. Jun and Mo needed to know if these improved stats were enough for him to proceed with the plan. The growth he'd achieved was tremendous, and they were about to embark on the mission to rescue Squad 1. Park believed he had already surpassed their rank and was nearly C rank, destined to become a high-ranking hunter someday. Back at the hunting grounds, the guards watched in stunned silence as the clones continued to pummel the bullies. Meanwhile, the other hunters who had been targeted by these bullies felt a surge of exhilaration as the fight raged on. The guards yelled for them to stop. Jang Sang-won asked what exactly they were supposed to stop, and the guards retorted that this had gone too far, and that he couldn't do this. The young hunter challenged the guards, asking why they hadn't intervened when the other hunters were being beaten. He said he wouldn't hold it against them, but they could just keep guarding the entrance like they always did. He ordered the clones to crush all of their phones, ensuring they couldn't contact anyone for backup. The 3 defeated hunters considered their options, thinking about moving to a different hunting ground. Within the hunting grounds, someone was diligently collecting gems. However, exhaustion seemed to be setting in. He sat down, questioning why he was even bothering to continue. Just then, he heard a noise at the entrance and assumed it was someone coming to check on things. As the young hunter entered, the other person inside told him he still needed a little more time to fulfill his quota. Then he realized it wasn't a guard. Jang Sang-won said he remembered seeing him during the horned rabbit hunt. He greeted him, remarking that it had been a while, even calling him by name. Now he finally remembered where he'd seen the guy before, but he also noticed 3 other people had entered with him. He questioned how they got in, as he was certain members of the Silverwing Guild were guarding the entrance. Jang Sang-won wondered aloud what someone as weak as him was doing in a D-rank dungeon. He added that, judging by his appearance, he didn't think he was there to hunt. He figured he was just scavenging what other hunters left behind. He asked if the Silverwing Guild had let him bring in his phone. He expressed pity for him, but demanded to know what was going on out there. At that moment, he revealed his phone screen, saying not to worry about the idiots at the gate. He just wanted to know how those D-rank hunters had made such a bold move. He was told to start talking, or he'd end up like them. He began to explain that Jang Sang-won should know that gems drop after D-rank monsters are defeated. Zhong mentioned that he wasn't aware those only came from higher-level monsters. He went on to explain that even after being defeated, the gems remain within the monsters for quite some time. Within the dungeon, it's common for monsters to fight amongst themselves, and when that happens, they drop 2 gems instead of 1. This, he explained, was how the gems accumulated within the dungeon. He wondered how the others had gotten involved. On that note, he said they either owed a debt to the guild or were sold to the guild by someone. He explained that most people were in debt or were rookie hunters, and if someone were caught by a monster down there, there was nothing that could be done. Jang Sang-won remained silent, simply listening to what he had to say. Even in silence, he was comparing the situation to the game. He figured he would never see something like this in reality. Out of goodwill, he told the man he could leave. However, the man didn't seem to understand and repeated that he should leave before he changed his mind. As the man was leaving, Sang-won heard him say to leave the gems behind. He told him that just because he was agitated didn't mean he believed they were on good terms. After opening the bag, he realized he had collected quite a lot of gems. He handed the bag of gems to number 1 and ordered him to eat them. Number 1 began to devour them ravenously. A hunter began running, seemingly afraid of something. He was yelling as a monster was chasing him. He was running from a C-rank monster. The man was just a worker for the Silverwing Guild. Kim Yoyen was fleeing from a C-rank monster known as an abomination. In the midst of his escape, his foot twisted, causing him to fall. He was now on the ground in front of the monster. He even closed his eyes so he wouldn't have to see his income in such a place. However, he felt someone grab his collar. politely asking for permission to do so. The young hunter lifted the man high into the air, dodging the monster's attack. Kim Yoyan wondered who the man was. Jang Sang-won introduced himself as his savior. He was curious about the gems, but was told they were left behind long ago. His other curiosity was why he was talking about the Haisum Guild, as the others outside said they were from a different guild. However, Kim was reluctant to say anything with the monster present. Suddenly, another creature appeared, its appearance also different. Despite this, Sang-won insisted on getting answers, wanting the man to answer the question about the guilds. Without warning, the man began to run again, trying to save his life. All he did was get grabbed by the collar again. Because he hadn't answered his question, he still couldn't escape. But Kim didn't know how he could be so comfortable with monsters all around. Sang-won told him not to pay attention to the events happening there. Kim Yoyan watched the situation, unable to tell if it was a team or if the man was simply a summoner. To be sure, the young hunter told him he would be safe there. Just then, one of the clones quickly lost its fight. Even witnessing it with his own eyes, he couldn't believe it had lost. He was deeply dissatisfied. He'd fed them expensive gems, and still, they were defeated. The monster continued to glare at them all. Kim Yoyan wanted to run, but the hunter's orders were to stay put. He couldn't understand how they could fail after consuming such valuable resources. Realizing Kim was about to flee, Jang Sang-won ordered him to remain still. He needed to focus. He already had his sword drawn, ready to face the monster. Now he wielded the cursed sword, while the monster held a bone sword of its own. Even so, the monster was at a disadvantage. He just wanted to eliminate the monster as quickly as possible. His attacks were swift and precise. Watching from a distance, Kim Yoyan realized just how powerful the young hunter was. He was certain Jang Sang-won would destroy the monster, even if it was a C-rank monster. No matter how the creature roared, no matter how it glared, all Jang Sang-won saw before him was the monster that had attacked his sister. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to compose himself. Sensing the danger, Kim Yoyan shouted a warning. Jang Sang-won's clones rushed towards the monster, shielding their original. He joined to fray himself, cleaving the monster in two. The creature reeled from the fatal blow. The look in his eyes made it clear. He wasn't playing games anymore. It didn't matter what rank the monster was. However, he found a wave of nausea washing over him each time he used the cursed sword. Kim Yoyan was astonished by how Jang Sang-won had defeated the monster. One of his clones lay on the ground, and he went to check on it. Kneeling beside number one, he asked if it was all right. He noticed a strange wound, one that wasn't healing. Kim Yoyan told him the monster's bone sword carried a corrosive curse. Jang Sang-won was annoyed. They consumed so many gems, focusing solely on attacking, and forgotten to dodge. When Kim asked if the boy on the ground was human, the young hunter simply replied, "You could call me a summoner." The boy, Kim Yoyan, made a few facial expressions, but that was all. After a moment, he offered him a small vial, saying, "If he uses this, he might last a little longer. But I'm not responsible for anything that happens." Jang Sang-won looked at it, asking what it was and if it was medicine. He noticed the skull drawn on the side. He had no other choice, so he gave it to number one to drink. He waited for a reaction, and indeed, the wound seemed to be shrinking. He thought it had an incredible effect and asked what kind of medicine it was. Number one was already sitting up. Jang Sang-won was relieved, thinking it was fantastic that his clone was recovering. However, the strange young man said it was only temporary. There were side effects. The clone's life force would be consumed. He added that his ability was poison, and level 5 at that. He explained that the clone's energy would eventually be depleted until it ceased to exist. Having heard all this, Jang Sang-won gave the clone an order. Since it was going to disappear anyway, it might as well get back to hunting. Just as the young man had predicted, he anticipated the clone would act accordingly. Jang Sang-won also found himself curious about the young man's identity. He'd noticed the young man kept monsters as pets, each one remarkably strong. Jang Sang-won mused that he couldn't possibly be a B-rank hunter, considering he himself was only E-rank. Questions gnawed at him. How could an E-rank hunter even be inside a D-rank dungeon? And how is he hunting with such apparent ease? He wasn't the only one with questions. Zhong also had his own, and he was about to voice them. The first question revolved around why the young man had spoken to him in the Yolo Guild warehouse, as if they were old friends. Nearby, several crates were being moved. All of this was happening under the watchful eye of the guildmaster. They inquired whether this was a sufficient amount. Kim Sienna, the guild manager, questioned why they had suddenly started gathering these items, as it wasn't their usual practice. Upon learning it was a favor for Mr. Want, she pressed further, asking why he needed so much. She explained that it was Jong Sangwon who was using all of these supplies. They'd heard he was the one consuming everything. Kim Yoyen, overhearing, felt a prickle of unease. He was already sensitive about the matter. However, he justified his actions, believing it was a preemptive measure against some potential villain. Then, softening slightly, he added that if she wanted to discuss it properly, she could. Jong Sangwon realized he was being played for a fool. He stood up, declaring that wasn't his only question. He also wanted to know why the Heisen Guild had been mentioned. Kim Yoyen thought that, as a hunter, he should already know. But Jong Sangwon retorted that he'd only recently received his license. He then asked if Kim Yoyen had also been caught up in that moment with the others. For a fleeting second, a memory surfaced, a girl opening a door, facing a complicated situation. But Kim Yoyen simply replied that Jong Sangwon didn't need to know. He also internally berated himself for his foolishness in revealing his abilities. Jong Sangwon bid him farewell, having not received the information he sought. Kim Yoyen felt a pang of regret, thinking they could have talked more. As Jong Sangwon left, he told Kim Yoyen he could leave too, as there was no one else of importance left. As he prepared to depart, Jong remembered something he wanted to give him. He complimented Kim Yoyen's abilities, finding them quite impressive. However, Kim Yoyen interpreted this as mockery. Jong offered Kim Yoyen a card, suggesting he contact him if he ever found himself without work or fearing reprisal from a higher-ranked guild. He then instructed number 5 to escort the young man to the entrance. Jong Sangwon considered that Kim Yoyen's abilities could be useful to his clones, but he wasn't sure if he should have been more insistent in his attempts to recruit him. He paused for a moment, observing the efficiency with which his clones dispatched the monsters. All those gems were working wonders for the clones. However, the side effects of the medicine he'd administered were beginning to manifest. Despite number 1's confidence that his regeneration could hold out a little longer, he eventually collapsed. Following this, Jong Sangwon summoned number 2 once more. When he returned, he instructed him to equip himself, because they were about to resume hunting. Unbeknownst to them, they were being watched. As soon as he noticed Jong Sangwon leave, the observer notified another companion who was also waiting. 2 members of the Silver Wing Guild, engrossed in conversation, discussed Jong Sangwon's clones, mistaking them for a single individual. One of them seemed to know something about a hidden compartment behind a false wall. He suggested investigating the hidden area, and to their delight, they stumbled upon the seemingly abandoned location. One questioned the purpose of such a place. The other replied that it was designed for the immediate supply of materials within the hunting grounds. It also processed narcotics, but something far more valuable took precedence. He spoke of highly refined crystal gems, boasting a capacity 100 times greater than ordinary gems, a single one capable of boosting attributes by 0.5. His companion, however, argued that the side effects weren't worth the risk. What good were powerful attributes if one transformed into a monster? Yet, everything changed when they discovered a method to further refine the gems, creating a product safe for human consumption. The potential profit was clear: millions. They decided against taking anything immediately, opting to return the following day. They couldn't risk losing everything by alerting others to their discovery. Kim Yoyen, startled, realized he'd been found out. Shaking off the persistent clones proved difficult. They relentlessly attempted to herd him towards the entrance, forcing him to repeatedly order them back. Remaining in the hunting grounds had initially seemed like a sound decision. Unfortunately, other hunters from the Silver Wing Guild had apprehended him. He'd found the crystal gems he sought, and in abundance. He stuffed them into his belt, filling it to the brim. though a nagging feeling told him it might appear suspicious. Observing a group departing, being guided towards the exit, he realized he could blend in. The clones, spotting him amongst the others, made no attempt to stop him. Their directive was to escort him to the entrance. Seeing him safely leave, they considered their mission accomplished. Once he knew he could escape, he ran as fast as his legs would carry him. The thrill of outsmarting both guilds surged through him. Zhang Sang-won, satisfied with ensuring the group's safe passage and having dealt with the monster, surveyed their gem-filled bags. He pondered the recent gem shortage, the empty store shelves, but this was a far better haul. One of the clones, its features identical to the others, suggested consuming them all. Their master, however, intervened, warning that doing so would transform them into monsters. A notification flashed across his phone screen, and he paused to read the message. Details of the mission would be explained the following day. The next day, the two returned to retrieve their crystal gems, only to find them gone. Distraught, knowing the gem's efficacy expired the next day, they were at a loss. They began pressuring the guards, hoping for any scrap of information, demanding to know who had been granted access. The guard explained that they had only authorized their entry, but couldn't prevent other hunters from accessing the area. He revealed that the only other person to enter was the one who had attacked him, and aside from those they had imprisoned there, the only other individual was someone they'd had a confrontation with. Their minds raced, recalling the strange man and his companion, wondering why, of all people, it had to be them, lurking in the shadows of the night. Kim Yoyen was still irritated about being assigned to the C-rank engine, admitting that if it weren't for Zhang Sang-won, he would have been dead. He was content with not having obtained anything truly valuable, knowing that if he sold the gems now, the Silverwing Guild would be suspicious. He decided to hide them for the time being. Zhong's business card, given to him earlier, slipped from his pocket. He noticed it and stared at it for a moment. Kim Yoyen remembered Zhong praising his abilities. Even so, he didn't give it much thought. He was determined not to join Zhong just because he'd been complimented. Odin's Tower. That was where Kina Guild's top team was located, including Want's sister, the team's leader, who was trapped there. Zhong didn't understand what Mr. Want meant by being trapped in the dungeon. He began to explain. Odin's Tower was a dungeon with a peculiar structure. It had an entrance but no exit. Connecting it to the outside world was magic. The only way to contact those inside was by using telepathic skills. He continued, explaining that because of this, the place was restrictive. The only way out was to complete the dungeon or use a teleportation skill. This was why the cloning ability was so important. If something went wrong inside the dungeon, other hunters wouldn't be able to escape. Zhong asked, wasn't there a way for the first team to escape on their own? The first team was equipped with methods of escape, which made Zhang Sang-won question why they hadn't escaped yet. The man adopted a mournful expression, falling silent for a moment. Then he said he would recount everything that happened in Odin's Tower and how, 5 years before the Great Catastrophe, in 2005, it all went wrong. Want's sister awakened her abilities in a dark age, shortly after the catastrophe ended. Even at a young age, she was already hunting monsters in the monster parks. She was 16 at the time. During one hunting mission, 9-year-old Yuna came to find him. She walked through the destroyed city with ease and handed him a snack. One day, Want worried about his sister, while she nonchalantly said she wasn't hurt. That day, his sister revealed her subspace storage ability. He asked Yuna how she did it, and she replied that it just happened and that she could store a lot of things inside. Yuna offered the snack to her brother again. He refused and told her she could eat it herself, his tone encouraging. Want told little Yuna that she had acquired a good ability and suggested they go to sleep. She agreed, as she was sleepy. She asked when Wajisi would return. Want said in 20 days, but he seemed to know it wasn't true. The siblings had been through many situations in their youth, saving themselves using Yuna's subspace ability. They could store items, even people, within the subspace. Want reminisced about the many adventures he and his sister had shared, starting from the first time they wanted to enter a dungeon. He remembered watching her grow up, like the time Yuna caught an alien fish. By the time she was preparing to enter Odin's Tower, she was already the leader of Kina Guild's first team. Want was extremely worried about the upcoming mission. It was correct to have at least one user with teleportation abilities on the mission, but people with that ability were rare. Yuna also added that this was her only chance to save herself using the subspace. Juan prepared to argue. His train of thought was interrupted by his sister, Yuna. She questioned whether he truly trusted her to complete the mission. He'd been uncertain all along if they could even clear Odin's tower. All the members of Team 1 seemed to have complete faith in Yuna, but Juan still worried about her and everyone in Team 1. Yuna reassured him, saying that if things became dangerous, she would return. Her persuasive words swayed Juan, and he agreed. Deep down, he knew he shouldn't have let himself be convinced, but she seemed so sure of herself. Confidently, she explained that in addition to teleportation scrolls, she had packed several months' worth of supplies in her subspace. Want felt he shouldn't be relieved by something like emergency supplies. The entirety of Team 1 gathered and set off for their mission. Won't want to stop them, should have stopped them, but in the end they went. On the day Team 1 entered Odin's tower, Yuna reminded him that they had been preparing for years and had already made up their minds. She added that he, as the guild leader, should trust his team more than anyone. He reluctantly agreed. He could only trust them. An aide told Want that he had to leave soon. His deputy asked if he had an appointment. He told her it was his turn to preside over the Awakening project. Zhong interrupted, commenting that he had participated in that project, but added that even if he had seen him, he wouldn't recognize Zhong, as he had changed a great deal. Mr. Jummo asked Want if he had contacted Team 1. Want replied that they had used telepathic scrolls, with one team member remaining at the entrance of Odin's tower to establish a connection. The first report indicated no problems. The second and third reports also showed smooth progress, so he began to calm down. But a month later, a problem arose. They were preparing to receive the next report. Team 1 was about to reach a point 40 kilometers inside the first floor and was about to activate the telepathic scroll. The scroll was activating slowly. Then the telepathic connection was established. The telepathic receiver seemed incredulous about something. Then he shouted. A report was coming in. They had advanced 700 meters past the last section of the first floor, but they had been ambushed by an unknown monster. Most of the team members were fighting the monster. Many were injured. Suddenly, the telepathic communication overloaded, nearly shattering the receiver's mind. Multiple telepathic scrolls were being used simultaneously. Someone yelled for them to control the mana flow. Then, a portal opened beside him. As he quickly turned, already anticipating the worst, someone used a teleportation scroll, surprising everyone present. The person began to stumble out of the portal, gravely wounded. Their condition was critical. This was the result of his irresponsible overconfidence in Team 1. The weak decision he had made, trying to save face in that moment by trusting Team 1 so completely, crumbled before his eyes as one of its members managed to teleport back. Park 1 ordered them to retrieve the team immediately. However, as they moved, the second portal closed. Even though it had just been there, the portal's sudden closure seemed unreal. The guild's magic specialist set up a quarantine zone around the chamber where the team had been. She roused the comms officer, needing to know if the telepathic link still held. She wanted them to tell the team to check outside only at 2 p.m. and, crucially, not to leave the subdimension. Despite his grievous wounds, Sante was consumed by the sting of failure. The monster had ripped apart a vital scroll. Park, surveying the carnage and the severity of the injuries, was deeply worried. Once the critically wounded were moved, Sante needed to be hospitalized. Park knelt devastated. Later, they would learn he had been discharged and wanted them to know. The telepathic connection held. She relayed their words. It was his sister, Yuna, who spoke. The battle was over, she said, her voice laced with apology. She believed they had failed. They could wait, she urged. There was no need to rush the mission. Their final words were a promise. They would return alive, no matter the cost. In the aftermath, they tried to recruit hunters, but the mention of Odin's tower was met with a wall of silence. No one would take the job. Even seasoned hunters, accompanied by their bonded creatures, refused the mission. It was deemed too complex, too dangerous. After that, the story everyone knew unfolded. The portal collapsed. Learning of the cloning ability soon after, Park wished he possessed the necessary attributes. He should have been able to reach the team. Now, he declared, it was time for a rescue mission. The Kina Guild wanted inside Odin's tower. Elsewhere, the men who had lost the crystal gems were in serious trouble. They had failed in their assigned task. They still hoped the Silverwing Guild leader would believe their story. It would be best to hear what the mediocre one had to say. Most of them wore masks, it had to be said. One didn't, but he wasn't on the hunter roster. Yang Juka concluded they had been cornered by an E-rank hunter. He asked if they thought they were the only ones dealing with crystal gems every day. If he couldn't collect the required quota, Hasten might not wait for the man lying on the ground to stop trembling. They hauled him to his feet again to face the situation. Everyone watched, speechless. The leader knew he'd be beaten again, but he had no idea where to get the gems. So he told Zhang Sangwon they should go. He figured they could beat some information out of a few people. The next day, at JM Corporation, on his way to the office, John remarked that he thought he'd seen something Park hadn't mentioned. Something about their reasons for trying to clear Odin's tower. He didn't know much about the hunter industry, but he knew about Odin's tower. According to the jumper he'd interviewed, who had supposedly conquered and successfully completed the Odin's Tower mission in 2012, the tower was empty. Only a single monster remained. No more treasures or items. This was the source of his suspicion. Park hadn't even explained why his best team was attempting to clear the dungeon. He didn't want to know anything more about it. He intended to complete the mission and rescue them, so he would focus on that. As he spoke, he noticed someone outside. They were quiet, appearing to be asleep. Junmo asked who it was. Want mentioned he had seen him at the hunting grounds, and then Mr. Junmo excused himself. Introducing himself, he said he was from JM Agency. After his nap, he slowly stretched, regaining his energy. At that moment, Yuna's stomach rumbled, indicating her hunger. For a beat, the three of them were silent. Then they decided it would be best to eat first. They went somewhere to eat, even becoming surprised at how much she ate. Zhong asked if she was really that hungry. He told her he had saved his number in her phone, in case she wanted to contact him. He also said he could tell she was going to work for an agency. She shyly replied yes. The agent wanted to know what the person's abilities were. He replied that it was item appraisal and potion making. At that moment, Zhang Sangwon's jaw dropped, saying that people would die after drinking them. Pulling his hair, he said there were also some potions that weren't lethal. He said that according to legend, it had great effects, so he wanted to utilize those abilities if possible. The agent approached him, asking if he planned to use it on clones, to which he softly replied yes. The agent immediately offered some equipment for making potions and even some funding. However, the young hunter needed to leave as he was about to depart soon, so he asked to finish his meal. Kim Yoyin asked if he was going somewhere, and he replied that he was going to a dungeon. But this time he wasn't going hunting. The objective was different. Kim Yoyin remained silent, observing. Shortly after, Zhang Sangwon tossed him 2 potions. He mentioned he made them earlier, one being a strength potion and the other a magic power potion. There were side effects, and he quickly asked what those side effects were. He replied that the strength potion would melt muscles, and the magic power potion would make the body explode. Zhong found it all very exciting. He called his clone to go with him, and said he would buy them food when he returned. Kim Sienna was on the phone, confirming whether she should gather all the jewels and transfer them to the Keenest Guild. She said she would contact them as soon as she finished. However, seeing the guards lying on the floor didn't catch her attention much. As she approached, she noticed all the security guards were down, and there was a crack in the wall. She figured she would use it to rob the guild's vault. Because she had the ability to detect intruders, she could see them hiding inside. Yuna rushed forward to grab them through the crack, but there were also people inside the crack, which surprised her. She thought she was sure she detected people, but only inside the vault. She wondered who was there, but she was hit. The Silver Wing Guild's vice chairman didn't expect her to answer that. He said he was sorry, but he really needed those jewels, and it was urgent. After knocking her unconscious on the floor, he asked his men if they had managed to snatch everything afterward. Then they poured some flammable liquid and set the place ablaze. They figured they were in the clear now, with the jewels in hand. Far away, in Iceland, a plane was descending. Zhong remarked that it was his first time visiting another country. They approached the portal that connected to Odin's tower. The guard told Zhong he could enter as it was manned, but Zhong noticed something was amiss. Even so, he didn't pause, continuing until he reached a spot that felt different. He realized the tower's entrance was far from what he'd imagined. It was a bottomless chasm with a vast expanse on the other side. A biting cold seeped into his bones. He decided to head to the guild headquarters. News of the missing jewels had already reached headquarters. Mr. Junmo arrived just as they were reporting the incident. Park, visibly relieved to see him, ordered a coat be brought for him. They provided one for his clone as well. They quickly showed him where Team 1 had vanished, 40 kilometers from the entrance. Junmo considered this a short distance. They had traveled for a whole month for this mission. He had prepared 3 teleportation scrolls, just in case. He decided to leave them for the clones. The plan was to ensure their safety. Using the scrolls was simple. The location was already marked, so all they had to do was tier them. A subordinate reported that a team had checked the perimeter and confirmed signs of a struggle. Park concluded, asking if there was anything else Junmo needed to know. What he wanted to know, Junmo declared with a touch of pride, was what they would have for dinner if his sister, Yuna, returned with him. He was feeling a craving for home-cooked food. Preparing to leave, he grabbed his sword and potions. Everyone was ready. The clone announced their departure. Watching them go, Junmo settled into a chair, also preparing to leave. He activated his familiar's ability. As he did, Park turned to watch him. Now that everything, he believed, was in the hands of Junmo and his clone, he realized the familiar's ability worked well in the blizzard. It was powerful, but the cold resistance was relatively high. Even without feeling the chill around him, everything looked like a perpetual blizzard. They had to push through it to go further. They seemed to have found Odin's tower. Communicating amongst themselves, they announced their arrival. One of the clones was acting strangely and had been for a while. Zhong found this odd, as he had complete control over the clones. Number 1's body, he could easily direct where to go. He did so, telling them where they should head. He warned that they had to rescue Team 1, as everything was locked down. He wondered how that place was even built. He checked the charts to see which monsters would appear at the beginning of the tower. They would be ice bats. The E-rank monsters that appeared initially always moved in packs, demanding constant vigilance. One of their defining characteristics was the presence of a D-rank ice bat leader within every swarm. One of the clones dispatched the leader in a blink, and it was over. As always, the sword was disgustingly coated in gore, to the point where the clone felt a flicker of nausea. Having cleared the area, they pressed onward. Those stray bats still flitted about even as they advanced. The feeling that things weren't quite over yet lingered. They had covered roughly 13 kilometers. According to their instructions, they were about a quarter of the way there and would soon encounter new monsters. As if on cue, larger creatures emerged. The clones gathered, observing. These monsters possessed magical projectile capabilities. They charged their shots before firing. The order came down, 3 to provide support from the rear, 2 to hold the front. All of the monsters seemed unusually aggressive. Left with no other choice, the clones attacked. These monsters were tougher than the previous ones, but the clones held their own. One could even say they handled them with ease. If only it could stay this way. However, something seemed to be shaking the very ground beneath them. Looking down, they realized cracks were spiderwebbing across the floor. The whole situation was looking precarious. Meanwhile, back at the guild encampment, Zhong was safe. The vice chairman voiced her concerns. It was a treacherous place. Even Team 1 had encountered difficulties. Park offered his opinion, stating that this was an operation where stealth and avoidance of combat were key. However, Hunter Zhang Sangwon's growth had exceeded all expectations. Even she was surprised to find his attributes were now on par with a B-rank hunter. More importantly, however, the clones were also growing stronger. Their attributes, too, could be considered B-rank. Seeing this, the vice chairman considered the average rank of Team 1, which was also B-rank. Looking at the young man, she realized he was a match for the entire team on his own. That's what she thought. She also made it clear that if the YOLO Guild warehouse hadn't been raided, the situation might have been much better. The legends of the ice golem mentioned in the reports surely didn't exist, and there were no other monsters on the first floor that could have stopped them. Park was certain he had warned him about the ice golem, so he should have been able to avoid it and proceed safely. He thought it would be truly difficult to get past without noticing that massive monster. However, such was the way of things on the battlefield. None of them had noticed the colossal creature, and now they would have to fight it. He was trying to figure out how to launch an attack without suffering any casualties. Even when struck by an incredibly powerful sword, it didn't bear so much as a scratch. Number 1, completely under Zhong's command, knew the fault lay with him. The monster had been dodging the attacks, while simultaneously launching its own. He knew that if he couldn't hit it with the sword, he wouldn't be able to inflict any damage. However, there was the looming danger of the other beasts, which were still unchecked. They too were attacking the massive ice golem, yet It simply grabbed them and devoured them as food, causing some fear amongst the clones. Not satisfied, the golem reached out to grab another clone. Realizing this, Zhong called out for him to dodge, even as everyone was dodging. They were told that the monster's attacks were so fierce that they even sent the smaller monsters flying. Number 1 knew he had to aim for the golem's core. He watched, trying to find where the core was while it continued to devour the smaller beasts, possibly having already found it. The problem now was how to destroy that thing. Magic bullets weren't having any effect on it either. No matter how many bullets the clones fired simultaneously, the situation was becoming increasingly dire. The golem kept moving towards them, and Number 1 yelled for everyone to get out of the monster's reach. However, its attacks were getting stronger, giving them no time to dodge, and one of the clones didn't have time to get away. Number 5 was caught by the golem. This was difficult, because Number 5 had a teleportation scroll. At that moment, Zhong had an idea. He charged with all his might towards the golem that was holding Number 5's leg. It was already putting him into its mouth, just like it had done to the smaller beasts. However, Number 1 struggled, trying to get as close to Number 5 as possible. Before he was swallowed by the ice golem, the other clones watched to see how the golem would react. Number 1 collapsed to the ground after reaching his target, and suddenly, the massive monster started showing some adverse reactions. Now satisfied, Number 1 looked at the monster and asked it if it liked what it had just swallowed, and, showing a torn piece of a scroll, asked it if it knew what that was. The impact seemed to directly affect the large golem's core. As he jumped next to Number 5, the effects of the scroll's summoning began to manifest. He thought to himself, teleportation scroll. He figured if he couldn't break the core, he should try something else. He would teleport quickly. A reaction occurred, an explosion, and now Number 1 was satisfied. A portal had been created. The golem was thrown into that dimension, and the portal was closing. The golem seemed quite unhappy with this outcome. Zhong thought that the people around might be a little scared as it fell. It looked like a giant block of ice. Meanwhile, abilities such as strength, vitality, and agility were all boosted. Looking at it, he was quite satisfied because, unlike other abilities, he couldn't boost his clone creation ability in any way. But regardless, he wasn't planning on summoning another one at that moment. He just wanted to keep moving forward. Elsewhere, a young man, bathing in his robes, noticed a notification. The notification stated that the list of those requesting an audience with him this month could be viewed via telephone. He inquired whether any of these requests originated from Korean guilds. The response was negative. No one had sought him out this month. He found this absurd and sensed a shift in the air. After dressing, he declared his intention to refuse all these requests. Gazing into a mirror, he contemplated proceeding with the Academy's inauguration ceremony. Meanwhile, Park was eating instant noodles. Chin Xiang remarked that this wasn't surprising, as he himself couldn't locate him. He asked if he had been apprehended by the Silverwing Guild. He had been handed over after causing some trouble. Even so, Chin Xiang saw some talent in him. He mentioned, however, that he had eventually received some assistance. The important thing was that he was there, and since they were busy, he could return to work. However, a noise at the door caught their attention. Approaching the door and opening it slightly, he was met with an unpleasant surprise. The person on the other side simply struck him, sending him flying back, leaving his companion worried for his well-being. The intruder, however, was calling for Park. He found it amusing to have found him there. He warned that he wouldn't waste time, so Park should tell him who attacked his guild members. He added that, as far as he knew, Park was the third person he had asked. Chin Xiang, displeased by the intrusion, glared at the Silverwing Guild's vice president. He questioned what the vice president was doing in his house. However, the attack he launched was easily deflected. The vice president simply blocked the attack and retorted that if Chin Xiang liked to flaunt his strength, he should also know that he, the vice president, was strong. And from that moment on, he would ensure he could handle anyone who started trouble. Seeing such a person acting so arrogantly truly angered him. Park, witnessing this, was terrified. He yelled for them to stop, saying he would go with them. Kong Taesung struck him, asking what he was talking about. He made it clear that he would go with them regardless, so Kong Taesung shouldn't think he was being generous. He also told him not to worry about his friend being hit. It wasn't because of him, but because he was arrogant and needed to be taught a lesson. Park, realizing the situation was escalating dangerously, began to fear for his companion's life. He shouted that he knew who it was. The guild's vice president wanted to know what he was talking about. Kneeling in submission, he said he knew who attacked the guild. He pleaded for mercy this time. Kang Shi, smoothing his hair, seemed disinclined to comply. He changed his expression, commenting that the truth would come out quickly enough with a bit of persuasion. Back with the clones in their attempt to rescue Team 1, their progress was now slow. Trying to locate more monsters, they were told to remain vigilant. From that point on, things took a strange turn. For a while, they hadn't encountered any monsters, yet evidence of fierce battles littered the area. I understand the monster remains, someone used, but there are human remains here, too. Number 1, checking their position, announced they were nearing their destination. From there, they needed to search for any sign of the squad's possible engagement. He also mentioned his daily 2 p.m. reconnaissance routine. It was almost that time now, and he was beginning to sense a disturbance. Despite the attack's blinding speed, it didn't go unnoticed. The enemy seemed to materialize from the shadows, striking with terrifying swiftness. None of the clones could identify the creature. It appeared out of thin air, as if invisibility was its innate power. Though the monster's appearance was unexpected, it was quickly subdued. But then they saw them, thousands more, just like the first. The icy landscape was suddenly swarming with creatures that seemed to pour from nowhere. He remembered the unexplained monster remains. There had to be a reason the attack squad hadn't reached the dungeon entrance. Now they understood. They'd walked into a trap. There was nothing to do but fight back with equal speed and ferocity. They focused on destroying as many monsters as possible, hoping to push through the onslaught. The monsters seemed endless, their numbers undiminished. Then, for a fleeting moment, they vanished, only to reappear, attempting to ambush the others from the unseen. He couldn't see them, but the other clones could. He couldn't understand how they anticipated the invisible monster's attacks. They made it look effortless. He decided it was best to let Number 1 take the lead while he observed. As Number 1 fought, he watched intently, believing he was close to understanding their secret. He realized the clones were reacting to sound. That was the key to their swift defenses. He studied how each clone evaded the invisible monsters, even without seeing them. The subtle shift in the wind alerted them to the monster's movements. He thought he had it, but he couldn't replicate it. He knew achieving the clone's level of agility would require extensive training within the subdimensional space. A voice called out for the captain, trying to get her attention. It was almost 2 p.m., time for their routine check of the outside world. She responded, her voice heavy with despair, confirming their fears. They wondered if the rescue team would arrive. Exhausted and hopeless, she rose to perform her 2 p.m. duty. She no longer had the strength to offer false hope. She was certain the same chilling silence of the icy plains would repeat itself. Then a sound. She couldn't believe it. The clones realized they were surrounded. Enemies were everywhere. Zheng thought he could hold on a little longer. Aside from their invisibility, these monsters didn't possess particularly strong defenses or speed. They weren't that dangerous. The attacks continued to be absorbed by the clones, even by Number 1, who was briefly under the direct control of the original. He realized that while these monsters weren't dangerous individually, their sheer numbers posed a significant threat. Even minor injuries, no matter how small, couldn't be ignored. If they were experienced, he knew he needed to get out of that place quickly, but he couldn't even estimate if there were hundreds or thousands surrounding them. Just then, something caught his attention. A rift opened up ahead of him. In that moment, he understood. He'd found the first squad. He yelled to the other clones, urging them to run towards the opening they saw. The captain of the first squad, however, startled, was overjoyed at the sight of someone from the outside. She told the others, with a hint of disbelief, and they were relieved, having heard that something was coming for them. Everyone stared. They were humans, and there were a lot of them. But the captain also noticed the thousands of monsters swarming behind them. Everyone realized this madman had led all the monsters right to them. Zhong yelled out, explaining he was there to rescue them. But then he also shouted for them to save him too. The captain was already preparing the first squad. She ordered them to go down and support him. They shouldn't waste any time. A shield was erected so they could achieve their objective. Another member activated their magic arrow skill. While one activated their shield to protect the team, another attacked with magic arrows. Meanwhile, the original, controlling Number 1's body, ran with the others towards the first squad's location. Everything just needed to hold long enough for everyone to get inside safely, leaving the monsters behind. Once inside, he thought they would be safe. The captain urged everyone inside so she could close the entrance. The monsters were all there, surrounding them. The captain, simply listening to his thoughts, said he was the rescue team. It seemed not everyone was thrilled. Despite her hesitation with the answer, she needed to ask if he was from the Kainos Guild. He simply stated that she was half right. His name was Kong Tae-sung, and he had come at the request of the Kainos Guild's leader, Park Won-tae. Everyone was relieved that he hadn't abandoned any of them. She immediately asked if Song Tae would be all right. He said that he was alive, but as far as he knew, he hadn't woken up yet. She quickly realized this man was very close to their team. She apologized for her directness, but they needed to leave quickly. Captain Park was waiting at the entrance to Odin's tower. He told her not to keep her waiting, and that he had brought teleportation scrolls. However, the captain seemed less than pleased about leaving. He noticed her unease, wondering what was wrong. Looking closely, the numbers seemed off. They'd started with 10. Even with one gone, there should have been 9. The captain said it was shameful to ask for help again, but even so, she requested his assistance once more. He asked her what she meant. She explained that one of their companions hadn't survived the mission. They couldn't abandon that forsaken land, she said. He began to understand why there were only 8 of them. He also anticipated hearing that some were injured. Just then, he asked if there were any casualties. What exactly had happened? The captain explained they had been ambushed. Their healer had been in the rear. One of them seemed to be blaming himself. He believed that if he'd been more attentive, he could have saved her. She recalled that when they were ambushed, he was the first one attacked. Perhaps the monsters had targeted the one they perceived as most vulnerable. The captain explained that as soon as she realized the healer was under attack, she'd opened a dimensional rift and ordered everyone to retreat. They wanted to fight, but if they did, their companion would have nowhere to hide. They'd used a telepathic scroll to report back. In the chaos, they hadn't noticed a lurking monster. Then, finally, after being injured, one of their companions had been transported to another dimension. Zhong understood. That was the moment they'd lost the extra scroll. He also understood that the portal had closed before anyone else could enter. She confirmed this, saying that if she left, the dimension would close immediately. It was then he asked where the member who hadn't survived was. She opened a small portal, showing him where he was. Seeing his location, he realized that it would be impossible to retrieve him without dealing with the monsters. That was why she had stayed, he thought, foregoing escape. He couldn't tell them to just leave him behind. He agreed to help retrieve their other teammate, but he had one condition. He was here to save them, not add to the casualties. He warned that if there was any chance of failure, he would leave alive. She agreed, saying she was certain that wasn't what their companion would have wanted. Secondly, it was their responsibility. Even though she said it was too dangerous and hadn't asked for this kind of help, he told her not to worry. He explained that they weren't real people, they were clones. This revelation shocked her. Meanwhile, in Agent Jinwa's office, he was about to receive an unwelcome visitor. The vice president of the Silver Wing Guild was there, looking for answers. He was deeply displeased that the hunter who had troubled them was connected to that association. He asked him, wasn't it enough to be enemies with the Poseidon Guild? He warned him to hold his tongue. After being dismissed, he gripped his arm tightly. He would ask again, he said, squeezing hard to inflict pain. He wanted to know the name of the hunter who had faced his guild. Despite being at a disadvantage, the agent didn't give up on his hunter. Kong Tae-sung, however, continued squeezing his arm. He said the right arm would be next, but just then, one of his men entered. He announced they'd found information on the person they were looking for, the vice president of the guild. He declared they would find him no matter what. He had all the information on Zhong Sang-woo. He also added that he lived in a nice neighborhood, and they should send someone to the address. Kim overheard them planning against Kong Junmo. She didn't know how that guild had ended up there in the first place, but she knew things were bad. The agent on the floor wondered why they were looking for the hunter. Kong Tae-sung mentioned he'd defeated some of their hunters and asked if they'd heard of the Jewel Fathers. He added that he knew the agent was known for being stubborn, so he wasn't sure he'd tell them. As Kim realized her actions had led to the guild taking these steps because of the crystals she'd stolen. Back where Squad 1 was, Zhong was explaining that they weren't real, just clones. He clarified that his clones weren't mere illusions, so they didn't need to worry about their lives. He explained it was Plan 4 and 6. They would take the teleportation scrolls while guarding the dimensional entrance. He said they shouldn't leave under any circumstances. Their safety was paramount. However, Squad 1 wanted to help. Zhong knew they were strong, but he had a responsibility to get them back safely. The captain questioned this, as they had encountered a horde of ferocious monsters that had led them in that direction. Afterward, Zhong said he had a plan, so they should trust him and wait. Yuna, watching him, seemed less than convinced, but she had no choice but to trust him. She also thought that ever since the portal incident, he'd been focused on raising his stats like a man possessed. But he wasn't satisfied with just those stats. Captain Yuna asked if he was ready. He replied that he was holding a small vial, thinking it would always help him, making things easier. He asked to borrow number 4's knife. He told them to take their machetes and strength potions. He instructed them to leave immediately with the others once they found the body. The captain warned that when no one was outside, the monsters just stood still and waited, which could last for days. He also told them to be careful. He snapped his fingers, and Zhong created another dimension so he could go summon his clones. He left. They returned to that hellish battlefield with the skilled, invisible monsters. Despite seeing the objective ahead, he wasn't sure it would be easy to get there. He and his clones set off. But before the final attack, it snowed all the way. He told them to keep their distance and not go near the entrance. The squad members were impatient, unsure if Zhong would be all right, and thought they should help. Though they'd witnessed his escape from the monstrous horde, the entrance lay 40 kilometers distant. Zhong urged them to trust him, assuring them he had a plan if things went south. He could only pray it worked. Meanwhile, the relentless assault on the clones continued. Controlling number 1's body, he managed to block an attack for the first time. The order was to keep attacking, yet they noticed the monsters seemed fixated on the body lying on the ground. That was their objective, but reaching it appeared increasingly difficult. One of the clones warned of approaching danger. The monsters seemed to be enacting an encirclement strategy. It was then that Zhong decided to use the strength potion. He drank it down. Moments later, a strange reaction began to take hold. Power surged through him. He ordered them to attack all monsters, but to avoid the body on the ground. He activated the power of the magic bullet, a spell-infused projectile capable of targeting and striking multiple enemies at once. The resulting explosion sent monsters flying, briefly clearing a path. The sheer noise startled Squad 1. They watched through a dimensional rift created by their captain. She asked number 2 if he could move. He confirmed he could. She instructed him to grab the fallen comrade. However, the strength potion's effects were proving uncontrollable. The liquid-like being was too powerful, radiating an almost explosive energy. Zhong warned that this would attract attention. They needed to retrieve the body and get out. The clones swiftly grabbed the body and were ordered to flee. Number 1 was about to detonate. Seconds remained. An instant later, a tremendous surge of magical energy consumed everything. But the 2 clones had accomplished their objective. They just needed to reach the dimensional rift. The captain was relieved. As soon as they entered the rift, their comrade would be safe. They began to use the teleportation scroll. However, they were warned against teleporting yet. One of them was still outside. Despite the warning, they weren't overly concerned. It was only a clone. They watched him outside, alone, under attack, on the verge of exploding. The captain wanted to stay and protect him, even if he was just a clone. But she was held back. She tried to reach him at the last moment, but the teleportation scroll had already been activated. Number 1 simply smiled, tipped his hat, and said they would meet on the other side. Entering the explosive state, the apostle detonated. The status window seemed to be frantically calculating every single one of their stats. In a different scene, someone was cutting fruit for Song Tae. They mentioned that today was the day of the rescue mission. They commented that the mission was probably over by now, and he should be waking up soon, so he could greet the others with a smile. The young man, who had remained motionless, began to move his fingertips. Back with Squad 1's mission, their arrival caused quite a stir. The guild's vice president began to notice something strange. A dimensional portal was forming. The 2 realized the attack squad was returning. I see something coming out of it, despite holding on to hope. Another memory from a different time surfaced, a time when only 1 person had made it out alive. Even then, they had been gravely injured. He knew this wasn't the time for such wishful thinking. He needed to focus, to wait for his sister to emerge from that swirling chaos. His heart could barely take it, his vision blurred, but he believed, he knew that was her. When everything came into focus, he realized his sister was standing right in front of him. He could scarcely believe it. Tears streamed down his face. unchecked. Zhang was still activating his familiar skill. However, this was the first time he'd experienced blowing himself back to reality. He saw the siblings, safe and sound, reunited once more. Yuna, overjoyed to see her brother again, asked, "Did you cause too much trouble in the guild while I was gone?" He, still trembling with emotion, ran to her and embraced her tightly. Holding her close, he continued to weep, telling her that everything was all right now. "Everyone's back," he said. The words reminded her of someone missing. A tremor ran through her, and she began to cry. I lost someone too," she explained, her voice choked with guilt. Tears she had held back for so long finally flowed freely. I thought no one would save us," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I was so scared." Her brother held her close, thanking her for coming back safely. His words only made her cry harder. At the hospital, the unconscious young man's companions were utterly shocked to see him sit up and ask to go home. Elsewhere, they were preparing to return. The clone handed the original Zhong Sang-woo the sword, potions, and teleportation scroll. Zhong was distracted, looking at his status window, wondering how much his attributes had increased. This time, when Park approached him, Zhong was startled. He could only offer his thanks for Park doing what he said he would. Park seemed embarrassed. "I just did the job I was offered," he said. He then told Zhong that things weren't over yet. "If you run into trouble, contact me," Park offered. "I'll help you regardless." Zhong felt both honored and awkward. Zhong tried to return the teleportation scroll, but Park reminded him he'd already used one to defeat the stone golem. Even though Park insisted he keep the scroll, Zhong felt uncomfortable accepting it, so he offered it back again. Park simply tore it up and threw it away. Yuna remained confused, believing all the clones were real people and that they had only lied to calm them down. Looking at Zhong, she wondered just how much stronger he could become in the future. However, as they left, Yuna noticed how bright it was outside. Zhong asked Park if he would be busy after he went back, and Park replied that he would be checking on their well-being. He also mentioned that he had a funeral to arrange. Everyone felt the weight of the loss of their squadmate. Meanwhile, Zhong's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. He hadn't had a signal for a long time, and now messages were pouring in one after another. One message, in particular, caught his attention. It stated that Agent Junmo had been taken by members of the Silver Moon Guild. A wave of shock washed over him. All he could think about was hunting down Mr. Gemma and exacting revenge. He explained that he needed to return immediately because Agent Junmo had been kidnapped. He also mentioned the previous altercation he'd had with them. As they tried to control the hunting grounds he was entering, Park 1-2 gave him a teleportation scroll to go directly to the Silver Moon Guild. At first, he was hesitant to take the scroll, but he needed to save the agent. Park 1 had previously told him that he would do everything in his power to repay the favor. Meanwhile, at the Silver Moon Guild, Kim was observing the situation, wondering why the rogue hadn't arrived yet. Just then, she heard someone call out to her. Someone grabbed her by the throat, their grip tightening, threatening to do her harm. He demanded to know what she was doing loitering around. At that very moment, Zhong and his clones arrived, their eyes burning with a cold fury. He replicated the man who held Kim. Just as the man's face struck him as familiar, he was hit. Zhong and his clones were back, and he wasn't playing games. He wanted to know one thing: where was Mr. Gemma? With a surge of adrenaline, he tightened his grip on the unfortunate man's throat, his voice thick with rage. "Where's the agent?" No matter how hard he squeezed, the man remained silent. Just then, Kim interjected, claiming to know where Junmo was being held. Despite the man's attempts to speak, Zhong ignored him completely. His clones had already secured the entire area outside. He pressed Kim for the information, and she revealed that the guild's vice president had taken Junmo to the warehouse. Zhong, his voice low and dangerous, told Kim to wait there. He wouldn't be long. Having endured a brutal beating, Agent Junmo was badly injured. They mocked him, saying he had fallen asleep. They taunted him, asking why he would provoke that particular guild when there were so many others to choose from. They wondered aloud if Mr. Zhong Sang-woo was also curious about when he would arrive. One of the thugs suggested they order some food while they waited. However, a commotion outside cut through their taunts. All the guards went on high alert. Kong Taesung, barely containing his eagerness for a confrontation with Zhong, rushed forward and burst through the door. His expression was anything but friendly as he demanded to know if they were members of the Silver Wind Guild. The vice president figured it would be a few more hours. One of the thugs asked if Zhong was alone, having heard he usually traveled with others. The vice president thought it best to check sooner rather than later. Zhong, a hint of amusement in his eyes, replied that he wouldn't hurt them too badly. Though the agent was badly beaten, he still worried about the hunter's life, refusing to divulge any information about him. Zhong told him to hold on a little longer. Several thugs were hiding, scattered in various locations, lying in wait to ambush him. But that wasn't going to happen. Zhong, fresh from completing his mission, was far stronger than before. He stated he only wanted to do to them what they had done to Agent Junmo. With his drastically improved reflexes, he could take them all down in the blink of an eye, and that's precisely what was happening. The closer they got, the more casualties piled up. Kong Taesung grew increasingly impatient with these useless thugs. With everyone defeated, he seethed with rage, ready to hunt down his next target. It was then that the guild's vice president remembered the guild leader's words. They would be defeated again. However, he told Kong to wait. He wanted to take some precautions. He said he wanted to know where the crystal was, and then he would let both of them go. The young hunter didn't understand what they were talking about, but it didn't matter anymore, as he had reached his limit. Kong thought Zhong was incredibly arrogant. He said he'd found a report in the office, a file about him. He admitted that Zhong was somewhat strong, but since he had defeated C ranks, he was somewhere between a C rank and a B rank. Looking at the data, he found it decent, but the cloning ability wasn't much. He even started to mock Zhong's abilities, asking who would fight with such an ability holding their head high. He continued, laughing, saying someone like that would desperately chase after more attributes. And he was sure that the abilities of those who followed Zhong were also weak. However, he noted that people like them gathered together. Zhong simply watched, amused. Frustrated, Kong declared that he could test whether they were truly that weak. The agent was extremely worried about Zhong and the clones. Thugs attacked the clones, but one of them whispered to the vice president that he thought the people outside had been defeated. Kong said that at least they weren't at a disadvantage, as he didn't like a group of people hitting just one person. Zhong, thinking Kong seemed confident, was about to see just how strong his abilities really were. Kong started to become transparent in front of him, stating that he wouldn't see it coming. Kang's ability wasn't visible to the naked eye. One of the thugs, seemingly a Kong admirer, thought Kang's awakened ability was incredibly powerful. Apparently, the agent didn't know what the man's ability was either. The invisible Kong stated that sensing mana or presence was useless. It was all nonsense. He asked Zhong if he had seen this before, telling him he should brace himself. He was supremely confident, saying Zhong wouldn't even be able to react. As the vice president prepared to fight, the young hunter took a deep breath. Zhong ordered the clones to seize Kong. He was subdued by 2 clones, and another clone started to taunt him. Kong couldn't even understand what was happening. He thought his ability was invincible in a small bar. Friends were drinking and chatting. They mentioned they were already juniors in college, not even realizing how quickly time had flown by. Yet, still girlfriendless, they paused to reflect. They asked if anyone had heard from Sangwoo, one of them having heard about the hunter work he was doing. The others could hardly believe he was actually doing that. Then one of them mentioned it was because they hadn't seen him angry yet. Then came the story of what happened back in 3rd grade, bullies trying to steal his money. It was said that when Sangwoo saw this, he started to fight back against those guys. However, he didn't hit them, they just got beat up. Zhang explained that he did that because he was angry, because those guys were coming after him. And he also said that if it was about himself, Sangwoo was generous. But if it involved someone close to him, he would change, and that's what happened in the warehouse. As his 2 clones held the guild's vice president down, he told the others to get Agent Junmo to the hospital. Kong Taesung was still asking how he saw him. Zhong Sangwoo explained that he seemed pretty confident in that ability, but he just got back from a bunch of monsters that had the same ability as him. As he said before, he also thought the guy talked a lot of crap in a short amount of time. First, he said his ability was trash, and he only trained because of that. However, among all things, he got one thing right. He just kept learning to become the strongest. And his stats were also great, saying that he punched Kong Taesung in the abdomen. Unexpectedly, Kong Taesung was surprised. He also felt that blow, which sent him flying far away. Crashing into some boxes, the clones reported that one of them ran away, but they were already dealing with the rest. They told them that the important thing was that Agent Junmo was receiving treatment. Looking at the man on the ground, Zhong realized he could still move. Kong Taesung couldn't understand anything. How was this possible? The reports didn't say that. His strength was only 19 and the others were weak too. There was no way he could have increased his stats so much in such a short time. Then he looked closely and saw the potion vial in his pocket. At that moment, he already had a plan. Zhong didn't want to hear anything else coming out of his mouth. Kang Taesung guaranteed that he wouldn't make any more mistakes. He wanted Zhong to know that he was a B-rank hunter with amazing stats. He quickly started to transform and very confidently said that he would show everything he had. Zhong wasn't interested in seeing everything he had to show. Kang Taesung started moving quickly. Unlike before, he couldn't believe it. But he realized they were figuring out his position through the fluctuations he was making, so he decided to eliminate the sounds he made when moving. Zhong noticed that his speed was impressive. He also realized that all the chaos was to cover up the sound of his movements. As Kang Taesung approached, Zhong simply punched him in the head, this time sending him flying again on the ground, but not defeated. Kang Taesung laughed. He found it amusing. Zhong wondered what he was laughing about, and then Kang revealed the small vial. He said he wanted to see what Zhong would ask after this. He commented on how strange it was that Zhong's attributes had increased so rapidly. The vial, he explained, held a secret. He was going to drink it. Zhong warned him against it. Ignoring the advice, Kang downed the contents in one gulp. A startling transformation rippled through him. His resilience visibly surged. With a sneer, Kang claimed he hadn't heard Zhong's warning, too preoccupied with becoming stronger. Zhong retorted that blaming him later wouldn't do any good. Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Bye-bye.